Chapter 319. The snow was still falling. Fan Xizha, who was by the stone mill in the garden, had finally completed 50 revolutions. Panting, he held on to the stone mill, feeling his entire body aching. He could not straighten his back. The sweat on his face turned into steam and rose, turning white in the face of the cold. It looked as if his entire body was smoking. "Wipe yourself, then change into dry clothes so you don't catch a cold." Haitang handed him a neat pile of clothes. Fan Xizha shook his head angrily and went into the inner room to change. Not long after, he came out yelling, "There's no place to bathe. What should I do if I stink?" Haitang glanced at him and smiled. "It's winter, and the things your brother made haven't been shipped to Shangjing." Fan Xizha couldn't help but shake his head again. "My brother drove me north, not to let you torture me." "An uncut jade is worthless," Haitang said calmly. "I remember when we were chatting in the royal palace, Fan Xian once said something that I thought was very reasonable." "What did he say?" Fan Xizha asked curiously. "When heaven is about to place a great responsibility on a man, it first torments his will, strains his muscles and bones, starves his skin, empties his body, and messes up his actions. Thus, the heart is moved, and one can do what one cannot." Actually, when Fan Xian said these words, he was thinking of the northern sea shore, the crabapple spring scene among the reeds. But Fan Xizha and Haitang did not know of that person's filthy thoughts. Fan Xizha heard these words and felt a chill rush to the top of his head. In a trembling voice, he said, "Tonight, you won't have dinner yet, will you?" Haitang smiled slightly. "We won't be eating here tonight." As they spoke, someone outside the garden respectfully said, "Second young master, I will be the host tonight." Fan Xizha was surprised that this person had responded so naturally. He turned his head and saw that it was Wang Qinian. Unexpectedly meeting a family member in a foreign land, thinking of the suffering these days, and thinking of the possibility of escaping the abyss of misery, Fan Xizha's expression was excited. With a strange cry, he rushed over the fence. "After dinner, you still have to come back." Haitang's words drifted down from behind. Her words pierced through the wind and snow and burrowed into Fan Xizha's ears, causing him to shiver in incomparable disappointment. When he reached the fence, he turned around and shouted fiercely, "I came to Shangjing to earn money. I'm not here to be a coolie." Haitang had already returned to her reclining chair. Expressionlessly, she said, "How can 1,000 taels of silver become 10,000 so easily? I feel that Fan Xian is pushing you too hard. Don't forget, your silver is all in my hands now." Outside the fence, Wang Qinian gave Fan Xizha a meaningful glance, indicating that it would be best if he did not offend Lady Duo. Even Sir Fan Jr. did not have a complete corpse in her hands. "Why did you have to do this?" Fan Xizha snorted angrily and pushed open the gate. Wang Qinian smiled and bowed to Haitang under the eaves. "Miss Haitang, I'll go now." Haitang looked at him and suddenly calmed down. After a while, she said, "Sir Wang, are you really in such a hurry to let him take over the Cui family?" Wang Qinian's heart trembled. He had not expected her to even know of Commissioner Fan's arrangements. He did not know how much understanding Fan Xian and Haitang had. He could only smile bitterly. "What are you talking about, miss?" Haitang, of course, knew about Fan Xizha's arrangements. She smiled slightly and said nothing more. She only warned, "We've just begun. Don't be too impatient." Wang Qinian had his subordinates bring Fan Xizha a bamboo hat and a snow cloak. On one hand, it was to block the wind and snow, on the other, it was to hide his appearance. Then, he bowed to Haitang and prepared to leave the fields next to the palace. "Did you also read the most recent letter?" Haitang reclined in her chair and looked at Wang Qinian, who was about to leave, with a smile that was not a smile. Hearing this, Wang Qinian was startled. He smiled bitterly. It is my duty. Miss Haitang, please forgive me. In the letter, please say a few words on behalf of me, so that the commissioner will not bully my daughter. Haitang laughed. This Honglu Temple of the Qing Kingdom's resident officer in northern Qi, Sir Wang Qinian, was indeed an interesting person. It was quiet outside the garden. Just like that, Haitang closed her eyes and fell asleep on the chair. Today in Shangjing, the wind and snow were intertwined. The wind whistled past, and the air was cold. The village girl slept very peacefully in such a cruel environment. There seemed to be a slight smile at the corner of her lips. With her astonishing cultivation, she was not surprised by the cold invading her body. On the contrary, she was closer to nature than ordinary people, such as the gentle nature of spring, or the harsh world of winter. Snow, piece by piece, gradually filled the sky. Under the eaves, the girl in a flowery jacket slept very comfortably. After an indeterminate amount of time, Haitang slowly opened her eyes. Her clear eyes reflected the falling snow outside the eaves, and the growing ice on the eaves. She could not help but feel a flash of joy and satisfaction. "Teacher, you're here." Outside the garden, on the stone path beside the Yuchuan River, a thick layer of snow had long been laid. At this moment, a person was slowly treading on the snow. The wind and snow seemed to have disappeared in an instant. One could only hear the rustling sound of each step landing on the snow. The person's feet were not wearing shoes. He stepped on the snow like this, determined and sincere. In a moment, he had reached the front of the garden. Stretching out a hand, he gently pushed open the fence door and walked directly to the eaves. He stretched out a palm and gently stroked the happy Haitang's head. "I've come to see you." One of the 4 great grandmasters in the world, imperial advisor Ku He, who was viewed as a god by the people of the world. If Fan Xian saw this scene, he would certainly silently criticize the other person's appearance for being so ordinary and unremarkable. He was far worse than Marshal Zhu. He couldn't even compare to Yi Liuyan's elegance of riding a boat halfway across the waves. Particularly after he took off the straw hat on his head and revealed his large bald head, there was not a glimmer of an otherworldly feeling. He was just a simple and common old man. However, the pure white plain clothes on his body and his bare feet declared his identity as an ascetic monk. Ever since he returned from the temple, he had not undergone a single ascetic monk. Haitang bowed deeply to her teacher with incomparable respect. Then, she invited the most powerful figure in the world into the room and served tea. Like a little girl, she sat on the ground beside him with a face full of innocence. Only in front of this great grandmaster would Haitang be so obedient and natural. Ku He's face was thin. His lips were very thin. His eyes were very sunken, but his gaze was even more distant. With a trace of tenderness, he looked at his true disciple and smiled slightly. "I come from Shi Mountain." Haitang's expression changed. She asked in surprise, "Have you found Sir Xiaofan's body?" Ku He slowly put down the teacup in his hand. With a trace of a smile in his eyes, he said, "In a cave between the precipices, I found the remains of an old friend." Haitang furrowed her brows. The precipices of Shi Mountain? After Ku He returned from the south, he did not come out of seclusion. Some people in northern Qi guessed that this great grandmaster should have been injured, but they did not know who the other side of that terrifying battle that took place in an unknown place was. Some guessed it was Siga Jian, some guessed it was Yi Luyun, and some guessed it was the Qing kingdom's most deeply hidden great grandmaster. No one would have thought that he and Wu Zhu had both been injured. After Ku He recovered, the first thing he did was carefully investigate Xiaofan's movements after he returned to the kingdom. Although this great grandmaster was faintly angry at the battle between the mother and son in the royal palace, Tianyi Dao followed the customs of the temple and rarely interfered in political affairs, so it was not good for him to say too much. But regarding Xiaofan's life and death, this great grandmaster, who seemed to be unable to care about external things, placed great importance on it. The precipices of Shi Mountain had been searched many times, but Xiaoan's body had not been found on the mountain. This became the most piercing problem for the northern Qi court. If that old man was still alive, then perhaps Shang Shanhu, who was under house arrest in his manor, would become active again. But for Haitang, since brother Lang Tiao said that Xiaoan had lost all signs of life after being stabbed by the curved knife, she would naturally believe him. Great Grandmaster Ku he had never doubted the judgment of his first disciple. So the northern Qi people were only thinking about one question: where was Xiaoan's body? No one knew how much effort they had expended in their search. Shi Mountain had been turned upside down, but they still could not find the whereabouts of Xiaoan and the mysterious man. After all, the northern Qi people could not understand how in this world there could be someone like a gecko who could climb up the mirror-like precipices of Shi Mountain. Later, it was Imperial Advisor Ku he who spoke, and the northern Qi people resentfully stopped their search. They did not think that this great Grandmaster would lower his status and personally go investigate. No one knew how much effort Ku he had put in before he finally found Xiaoan's body in a cave in the precipice on this windy and snowy day. Haitang looked at her teacher in shock. Only now did she notice that there were small wounds on his ankles. She asked with concern, "How can you get down from that precipice?" She was not in a rush to ask Xiaoan questions. What she was most concerned about was Ku he's health. After all, her teacher was old and had just recovered from his injuries. Ku he gently shook his head and smiled with a sigh. Going down is a bit troublesome, but it's not impossible. All we need to do is tie a rope. I just didn't think that the person Lang Tiao forced down the precipice would be able to escape so easily. Haitang lowered her head slightly. Perhaps he was carrying something like a grappling hook on his body. The grappling hook has no place to borrow strength. Ku he looked at her with a smile. You were so shocked earlier because you remembered what the precipice of Shi Mountain looked like. Haitang sighed. I really don't understand this matter. But it's already been a few months. Could it be that Sir Xiaoan's remains have not been eaten by the eagles in the mountains? Ku he's snow-like eyebrows fluttered slightly. He warmly said, that cave was very shallow. Logically speaking, vicious birds should have long since helped Sir Xiaoan ascend to the heavens. I didn't think that when I followed the rope down, what I saw was Sir Xiaoan's remains, as good as new. There were a few dead birds lying beside him. The birds had all turned to bones, but his body, aside from being a bit dehydrated, had not rotted. Haitang was surprised to hear this. She smiled calmly. What a powerful poison. Ku he gently nodded and changed the subject. Tell me about this young man, Fan Xian. I am very curious about him. Haitang's heart skipped a beat, but her expression did not change in the slightest. Smiling, she recounted everything that Fan Xian had done in Shangjing. Knowing that she could no longer hide anything for Fan Xian, she quietly said, that night after Xiaoan left the capital, Fan Xian stayed with the diplomatic mission, but no one saw him with their own eyes. When I went the next day, he was lying in bed. Back then, elder brother believed that the black-clothed man who fell off the cliff with Xiaoan was him, and he really is an expert at using poison. Of all the people in this world, only Xiaoan and Ku he had ever come into contact with the temple. Now that Xiaoan was dead, only Ku he remained. The emperor had painstakingly rescued Xiaoan and brought him back to northern Qi, but Ku he had tried his best to kill him. Now that she knew that Fan Xian might be the last person Xiaoan saw before he died, and Ku he was so careful about the secret of the temple. Haitang did not know what trouble her words would bring to Fan Xian. But she knew that this seemingly gentle teacher in front of her was, in reality, a wise man who held the pearl of wisdom in his hands. He had changed the subject earlier, naturally, to remind her. Unexpectedly, Ku he did not continue this topic. Instead, he gazed at her meaningfully and smiled. He took another sip of the tea in his cup and said, "Dwudwa's tea is getting better and better." "You flatter me, teacher," Haitang replied gently. "I think I know who Fan Xian is," He suddenly said very gently. His words came out of nowhere, and Haitang did not understand. She stared at her teacher in a daze. He slowly stood up, and a mellow smile rose to his face. "Before this young man came to Northern Qi, I went out and was injured. I think you must be very curious as to who in this world can injure me." Imperial advisor he represented the spirit of Northern Qi, so the matter of his injury had always been hidden. Although Haitang knew, she had never heard the details from her teacher's mouth. Now that she heard it, she immediately focused her attention. It was a blind man. He turned and gazed at the wind and snow outside his disciple's garden. He slowly said, "It was a blind man I met many years ago and have never forgotten." Haitang was shocked. She thought that it was already a shocking thing for someone in this world to be able to injure her teacher. She had not expected that the other person was not a great grandmaster known to the world, but a blind man. He continued to speak leisurely. "It is very strange that this terrifying blind man seems to have forgotten some things. He has forgotten that many years ago, I once met him." Haitang listened quietly. This blind man has already disappeared for many years. The smile on He's face rose again. "I did not expect that he would suddenly appear in this world again, and that the first person he came to find was me. Speaking of which, my heart, which has long been like an old well without ripples, is actually faintly proud." Haitang became more and more confused. This blind man once taught that idiot Sigu Jian a lesson. He once beat Yi Luyun until he abandoned his sword and finally became a great grandmaster. He sighed. "I guessed it was him back then, but I did not expect that he would come to find me this time. This is completely different from his secretive style in the past." Haitang suddenly opened her mouth and asked, "Could it be that this blind man is the most mysterious great-grandmaster?" He shook his head. His eyes, which seemed to be able to see through everything, also revealed a trace of confusion. "No, the blind man has never needed this kind of false reputation. As for the most mysterious of the four of us, he should still be in the Qin Kingdom's royal palace." Haitang did not understand. Since no one had ever seen the mysterious great-grandmaster, why were the people so sure that he existed, and that he existed in the Qin Kingdom's royal palace? The reason is very simple. He smiled. Many years ago, Sigu Jian had tried 3 times to enter the Qin Kingdom's royal palace to assassinate their emperor. Haitang called out in surprise. Only now did she know that Dongyi's Sigu Jian had done such a crazy thing. However, to use the realm of a great grandmaster as an assassin, even if the Qin Kingdom's emperor was the person with the most power in the world, it would probably be difficult for him to resist. Seeming to guess what she was thinking, He quietly said, "The people who know of this all think the same as you. They all think that Sigu Jian has a great chance. Unfortunately, within a month, he failed 4 times in a row. Although he wasn't injured, he didn't have any results." Haitang furrowed her brows and said, "That blind man, was he in the Qin Kingdom's royal palace at the time?" She still believed that the blind man who could injure her teacher was most likely the mysterious great-grandmaster. He smiled slightly and shook his head. At the time, the blind man was with the young lady of the Yi family in Jiangnan, repairing the palace treasury. The young lady of the Yi family? Haitang was even more shocked. Although she was the most famous figure of the younger generation, she knew of the secrets her teacher was talking about today. Each person was extraordinary and changed the shape of the world. He gently and naturally changed the topic. Turning around to look at Haitang, he said, "Do you understand now?" Haitang opened her bright eyes and shook her head. "Who is Fan Xian?" He looked calmly at his female disciple. "Fan Xian is Yi Qingmei's son, the mistress of the Yi family's son." Other than being shocked, Haitang was also confused. Fan Xian, the illegitimate son of the Minister of Revenue in the Southern Court. How did he have a connection to the Yi family? The Yi family? The Yi family that once ruled the world through business? The Yi family that had established the Overwatch Council, repaired the palace treasury, and continued their legacy to this day? He rubbed his hands and sat down. He sighed. Xiaofan was always locked up by Chen Pingping, so he didn't know the identity of the young lady of the Yi family. I just happened to know. The blind man could only be a servant of the young lady of the Yi family. This time, I was moved out of Shangjing to make it easier for Fan Xian to do things. Thus, Fan Xian's identity emerged. He is the descendant of the young lady of the Yi family. Haitang shook her head. She dared to express her opinion in front of her teacher. Although this reasoning is believable, it is too far-fetched. What if that blind master was just unwilling to be lonely in the mountains and came out to challenge you? It has nothing to do with Fan Xian going north. Besides, wasn't the Yi family destroyed back then? Before she finished speaking, He had already laughed. One matter cannot explain too many things. But think about Fan Xian's current position in the Southern Court, and then think about the strange movements in the Southern Court after he came out of Danzhou. When too many details are put together, the truth of the matter is clear. Don't talk about the destruction of the Yi family. The shopkeeper of the Yi family is still alive and well. For someone in the Southern Court to preserve a trace of the Yi family's bloodline is not something strange. Haitang was so worried that she laughed. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Her teacher was right. Even if Fan Xian was the illegitimate son of Minister Fan, even if he had the reputation of an immortal poet and the strength of an ace, given his identity and status, it was impossible for him to reach such heights. It was even more impossible for him to control the Overwatch Council in his left hand and the palace treasury in his right, the Overwatch Council and the palace treasury. Were these not the most powerful things that the Yi family had left to this world? Could it be that the gentle young man who often wrote to her had such a complicated and pitiful life behind him? You just repeated the poem Fan Xian recited in the restaurant. He gently patted his female disciple, who was still deep in thought. He smiled slightly and said, "You only discovered from this poem that he was the author of Story of the Stone. But if you think about it carefully, perhaps you will find that Fan Xian used this poem to express some other emotions, such as anger or dissatisfaction." In the summer of Shangjing, in the centenarian pine house, Fan Xian and Haitang drank wine and recited a poem when they were drunk. Keep me in Qing, suddenly meet my benefactor. Fortunately, mother, you have accumulated a sinister merit. Advise life, help the needy and support the poor. Do not be like my evil uncle and treacherous brother who love money and forget his own flesh and blood. It is exactly multiplication, division, addition and subtraction, above is the firmament. In the winter garden, Haitang repeated it in her heart. She finally experienced the emotions her teacher spoke of. She abruptly raised her head, shocked beyond compare. If Fan Xian, who was soaking in the hot springs far away in the Qing Kingdom's Tsang Mountains, knew that this pair of teacher and disciple would be so careless and use this poem to determine his birth, he would certainly be so angry that he would jump out of the hot springs and run naked to Shangjing to give them a good scolding and then explain that this was written by Lao Chao. It just happened to be similar to his own life. Before long, Haitang had already recovered her calm. In a gentle voice, she asked, "This matter can be big or small?" Since she knew of Fan Xian's past, she could imagine that there would certainly be many problems between him and the Qing royal family. How to use it was a matter that required careful consideration. The news that Fan Xian is a descendant of the Yi family, let the entire world know, he said very gently. Great Grandmaster he spoke very gently. The blind man? Haitang's heart was slightly confused. She didn't know how to protect Fan Xian's interests as much as possible. Ku He slowly sighed and said, although the blind man doesn't seem to recognize me, I think that since he purposely acted and left behind these clues, perhaps, he hopes to use my mouth to tell this interesting news to the people of this world. The great Grandmaster finally came to a conclusion. The blind man doesn't want to wait anymore. He wants Fan Xian to speed up his pace. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. Chapter 320. I have been sick recently and am in poor spirits, so I have rarely replied to reviews and updates. Everyone, please forgive me. After the wind and snow in the fields, the fragrance of tea still lingered in the room and floated in the quiet space. After a long time, Haitang quietly said, I understand. Ku He did not look at her face. Smiling slightly, he said, didn't Fan Xian ask you for the heart of Tianyi Dao in his letter? Give it to him. Give it to him? The two clean words made Haitang raise her head in shock. She didn't know if her teacher was joking or had lost his mind. The supreme heart of Tianyi Dao? That was a secret that could not be passed on. Was he going to give it to a powerful official of the southern court so easily? Ku He smiled slightly and said, this is something his mother gave me. It is only right that I return it to him. Besides, for the Qi kingdom, the more powerful Fan Xian is, the more headaches the southern royal family will have. It can satisfy my wish and also be beneficial to the country. It is the best of both worlds. Why not do it? Haitang opened her mouth slightly and couldn't speak for a moment. She knew what her teacher's true intentions were. A chill grew in her heart. This teacher and disciple had only guessed the relationship between Fan Xian and the Yi family. They did not know Fan Xian's other identity, so they unilaterally thought that after his identity was exposed, Fan Xian could only be a ferocious tiger within the Qing kingdom. Back then, when the Yi family had disappeared like smoke, the Qing royal family would have to bear the greatest responsibility. In the eyes of the northern Qi people, the more powerful Fan Xian was, the more trouble Qing kingdom would have and the safer their country would be. Teacher, if Fan Xian cannot withstand it this time, what do we do? The Yi family's property had all been taken over by the Qing royal family. Logically speaking, once the news that Fan Xian was a descendant of the Yi family got out, the Qing royal family would kill him in the shortest amount of time possible. Ku He shook his head and sighed quietly. The nobles who toppled the Yi family seemed to have all died in that night of bloodshed in Jingdo a dozen years ago. I truly cannot guess what the subsequent events will be like. Does the Yi family still have enemies hiding in the royal palace in the south? Perhaps that blind man wants to use this matter to force those people to appear. As the imperial advisor of northern Qi, Ku He's first consideration was the interests of northern Qi and the kingdom of the mother and son in the palace. As for what kind of predicament Fan Xian would face, it was not within his considerations. The old man smiled slightly and said, even if Fan Xian is unable to face the oncoming attack, with the blind man standing firmly behind him, even if he fails and wants to die, it will not be an easy matter. However, it was too risky to use the heart of Tianyi Dao to trade for such a powerful enemy. Furthermore, the words the teacher had said indicated a terrifying thing. The heart of Tianyi Dao had been given to the teacher by Fan Xian's mother. Miss Yi, what kind of person is she? Haitang's face was full of shock. Ku He furrowed his brows slightly and thought hard for a long time before he quietly said, at the beginning, I thought she was a little fairy who did not touch the world of mortals. Later on, I discovered that was not the case. Heaven Meridian Warrior? He's not a Heaven Meridian Warrior. Ku He continued to smile and said, the young lady of the Yi family is a mysterious woman who far exceeds normal geniuses. After a long time, Haitang respectfully saw Imperial Advisor Ku He out of the room. Looking at the teacher's bare feet stepping in the snow, the girl said in a gentle voice, "Teacher, Sir Xiaofan." In the snow, Ku He's figure paused slightly. A moment later, he said in a gentle voice, "He is with Master Zhuang." These two brothers were strangers in life, but they traveled together in death. It is not bad. Haitang lowered her head and did not say anything to hide her shock. It was not until today that she learned of this matter. This is a matter of the older generation. You young people have your own world. The heart must be personally handed to Fan Xian's hands. After Ku He said this, he took a step and disappeared into the wind and snow. Flipping his straw hat, he covered his old and smooth head. In the valley of the Tsang Mountains in the Qin Kingdom, mist rose from the vast expanse of white snow. Dozens of beautiful red-crowned cranes spread their wings and danced. They floated down a few meters from the ground. As if afraid and timid, they tentatively extended their long feet and stepped on the large hot springs surrounded by cedar trees below the mist. The temperature of the hot springs was just right. It was a little hot. Fan Xian's eyes were closed. His upper body was bare as he soaked in the hot springs. His neck was tilted back and rested on the hard, wet black rocks beside the spring. Most of his body was submerged in the water. His exposed skin was stained with a layer of red. His arms were not thick, but they felt very strong. Two thin fingers rested firmly on his right wrist. Fei Jie's eyes were closed. His eyebrows were trembling. His messy hair, soaked in the spring water, became unprecedentedly smooth. After being summoned back to the capital, Fei Jie learned that Fan Xian had brought his family into the Tsang Mountains to spend the winter, so he hurried over. Today, the teacher and student were soaking in the hot springs surrounded by cedar trees. This kind of enjoyment was quite extravagant. Your figure is not bad. Fei Jie slowly opened his eyes and withdrew his hand from feeling his pulse. The ominous brown in his eyes grew darker and darker. You usually can't see it when you're wearing clothes. Fan Xian also opened his eyes and smiled. The brothers of the Third Bureau have long praised my figure. He paused and then asked, "Teacher, do you have any ideas?" Fei Jie took a white towel from behind his neck and wet it in the hot spring water. He forcefully wiped the loose skin on his face and didn't speak for a while. Fan Xian sighed. Seeing his teacher like this, he knew that he didn't have any good ideas for disappearing the Jinqi in his body after it exploded. "You won't take the medicine I left for you." Fei Jie sighed worriedly. "Why try to be brave? If you take it, at most your Jinqi will be greatly damaged. At the very least, it won't explode." Fan Xian shook his head. "To me, greatly damaged Jinqi or no Jinqi at all, what's the difference?" "There's a big difference. At least you have the power to protect yourself." Fan Xian laughed. His handsome face was full of confidence. "I still have many ways to save my life. You know that since I was young, I have never been a barbarian who relied on martial arts to conquer the world. In the past, I could fight Haitang with my little tricks. Although my Jinqi is all gone now, I don't think that if anything happens, I can only wait for death with my hands tied." Fei Jie stared into his eyes for a long time before sighing. What a little monster. For a warrior, the importance of Jinqi goes without saying. Even if you have the Tiger Guards and the 6th Bureau watching, you should still show some sadness and disappointment. That's unnecessary emotion. Fan Xian recalled Uncle Wu Zhu's teachings when he was young. Faintly, he said, "If I can't be cured, then I have to accept this reality." Sighing and groaning won't help change the situation. Fan Xian, who was in the hot spring in Tsang Mountain, did not know that in the distant north, that unfathomable pair of master and disciple had already determined his identity as if it was child's play. They wanted to use this identity to throw the Qing court into chaos and push him against the Qing royal family. Regardless of whether or not Haitang would delay this matter, the distance between the two countries was too great. No matter how fast the rumors flew, at least for now, it could not reach the Qing kingdom. Thus, for Fan Xian, who knew nothing about the Yi family descendants' past, it was not his greatest danger or headache. Right now, he only wanted to recover the Zhenqi in his body and heal the damaged walls of his meridians. Take care of it first. Fei Jia was silent for a long time. I will prescribe a method. Take the medicine according to the prescription. Also, don't throw away the medicine I left for you when you were young. They are still useful. Fan Xian was a little surprised. His Zhenqi had already dissipated, so why would he take the medicine? In truth, Fei Jia didn't know what use it had. He just mentioned it in passing. He didn't expect that after so long, Fan Xian would actually use it. I've been in Tsang Mountain for half a month. I wonder how things are going in the capital. Fan Xian gently patted the hot spring surface and smiled. You've come from the capital. Tell me about it. Fei Jia scolded him. You receive at least a dozen intelligence reports every day, and you're still asking an old man like me? Fan Xian chuckled. Fei Jia said coldly, you used the excuse of recuperating to hide in Tsang Mountain, but the council moved against the Cui family. The capital has long been in an uproar. The north has captured hundreds of people and swallowed millions of taels of silver worth of goods. The crime you gave Cui Jian is also very real. It looks like a great family is about to be overthrown. You really are ruthless. Fan Xian smiled and explained, it's all what the court needs. The Overwatch Council's declaration of war against Xinjiang was abnormally fierce and sudden, and their actions were extremely ruthless. Spies all over the world had long ago blocked off the Cui family's smuggling routes to the north. With Yan Bingyun at the head of the 4th Bureau, they brazenly made their move. Without giving Xinjiang any time to react, they had already taken control of most of the people, goods, and money. After all, Fan Xian had been seriously injured. Everyone in the capital knew that he was recuperating in Tsang Mountain. Who would have thought that the sickly commissioner would suddenly and ruthlessly strike? This plan had been planned from the summer until now, and only after receiving the emperor's tacit approval did it quietly begin. Even if Xinjiang had more power in the various counties, they still suffered a great loss. Most importantly, Fan Xian had hidden his thoughts deeply. The eldest princess, Li Yunrui, had clearly underestimated her son-in-law. This time you've really offended the eldest princess. Fei Jia shook his head and sighed. The Cui family is one of the eldest princess's hands. You've cut off this hand of hers. Aren't you afraid that she? Fan Xian didn't finish speaking, but he understood what his teacher meant. After thinking for a moment, he quietly said, at the beginning, I was also worried. But after fighting with the second prince, I suddenly realized that there was nothing for me to worry about. With the emperor's secret approval, and the enormous power of the Overwatch Council, who in this world can stand against me? Fei Jia knew that Fan Xian was not a mediocre person who would get carried away with success, so he quietly listened to what his student had to say next. The resources I hold in my hands are too powerful. Fan Xian sighed. Regardless of whether it is the princes or the officials in the court, none of them are a match for me. The director once told me to set my sights higher. Only now do I understand that this not only represents the direction of the future, but it also requires me to cultivate this kind of confidence, even pride as a commissioner of the Overwatch Council. Today, in the court, there are very few people who can stand against me. Fan Xian analyzed himself expressionlessly. In the end, the court is an organization of violence. Aside from the military, no other government can compare to the Overwatch Council. And the emperor has always kept a tight grip on the military. This time, when he chased the Yi family out of the capital, it was a clear signal. Although the eldest princess has her own power in the military, the emperor long ago moved Yan Xiaoyi out of the capital. What does Xinyang have to compete with me? From Danzhou to the capital, it had only been 2 years. Following the changes of the times, with the efforts of Chen Pingping and Fan Jian, his mother's former comrades in arms, and with the tacit approval of the emperor of the Qin kingdom, that beautiful young man had, in a very short period of time, gained power that the world could not imagine. This kind of power was something that even he did not truly feel. It was not until he easily defeated the second prince in the capital that he suddenly realized that he seemed to have underestimated himself in the past. As long as the emperor's royal favor did not fade, as long as the old woman in the palace still thought that the young man was, after all, of royal blood, as long as Chen Pingping continued to live out his days in Chen Garden and threw all of the power of the Overwatch Council to him to play with, Fan Xian would firmly stand in the Qin court and not have to worry about any problems. Fei Jie suddenly said, Yan Xiaoyi is in the north. Did he not act this time? The northern expedition camp is far away from Cangzhou. There are countless valiant generals in the camp, 100,000 soldiers. Fan Xian laughed mockingly. They were unable to react at all. But the elders of the Cui family should have escaped to the camp. That line in Cangzhou, the 4th Bureau has not been able to completely strangle it. Fei Jie looked at him and suddenly laughed. Not bad at all. Fan Xian finally became modest. I am just a man who has made up his mind. For me to be able to do this so beautifully is all thanks to Yan Bingyun. Fei Jie laughed. In less than half a year, you were able to pull Ruohai's precious son into your camp and have him rack his brains to plan for you. You, really are not bad. Fan Xian was silent. He suddenly thought of Lady Shen. At this time, she should be playing mahjong with Wan, and the others in the Tsang Mountain estate. He thought to himself, after the matter with the Cui family is settled, should I invite Sir Yan Jr. to the mountains to spend the winter? Thinking of the estate half a mountain away from the hot springs, his mood suddenly improved. He pleaded to Fei Jie, teacher, about what I said yesterday, please consider it carefully. Fei Jie frowned and coughed. You want a girl as beautiful as a flower to follow me to study medicine, isn't that a bit too pitiful? Even if I agree, the minister will not allow it. I will talk to father, Fan Xian pleaded. My sister really likes medicine. Teacher, please take the trouble. Fei Jie scolded him. My name is Fei Jie, not Fei Xian. Fan Xian smiled. He knew that his teacher was angry, and that meant he had agreed. After a long time, Fei Jie's brows suddenly flashed with a trace of worry. But have you thought about it? The director and I are both getting old. There will come a day when we have to leave. Fan Xian was silent. After a moment, he suddenly said, I think the director must have told you about my past. Fei Jie nodded expressionlessly. At least up until now, His Majesty has been good enough to you. Fan Xian did not deny this. For an illegitimate child, the emperor was able to generously give him the Overwatch Council and the palace treasury. This kind of power, which even princes could not have, was enough to make up for the so-called status problem in the hearts of ordinary people. But the problem was that Fan Xian was not originally a person of this world. What he asked for was actually simpler. When he looked at problems, he would also be simpler. These two enormous organizations were originally my mother's, not the Qin royal family's. Giving them to me is something that should be done. If you don't give them to me, then you are shameless. Fei Jie did not know what he was thinking. He sighed and said, back in Danzhou, you said you wanted to be a doctor or a chef. In reality, I was very happy, but I was also a little disappointed. The lady's family business needs to be inherited by you. But now, seeing that you are about to inherit everything from her, I feel a faint fear. I don't know if you will regret it in the future. Fan Xian understood what his teacher was worried about. What if one day, the emperor suddenly felt that his power was too strong and posed a threat to the future heir? What should he do then? He smiled and comforted Fei Jie. Don't worry. At least for a few years, I think the emperor will trust my loyalty. He touched the scar on his chest. It was still a little itchy. After soaking in the hot spring, it appeared even redder and more sinister. Don't forget, she is the Empress Dowager's favorite daughter, Fei Jie warned. Furthermore, she is a madwoman. On the battlefield, she is no match for you. She will use some crazy methods, just like in the past years on Niulan Street. Fan Xian suddenly fell silent. A moment later, he said, there is one in the courtyard. Naturally, she won't do anything. As for inside Jingdo, even if she goes crazy, she still has to fear the emperor. If she really wants to vent her anger, the best chance is to kill me while I am injured and not under the eyes of the emperor in Jingdo. Fei Jie sighed. It's good that you understand this point. Fan Xian smiled and said, the current me is not so easy to kill. With a swish, it was as if a servant had taken a knife and carefully cut open a piece of rice paper. 1 li behind the hot spring in Tsang Mountain, on the pure white and sparkling snow in the pine forest, a bright red liquid suddenly floated across. It landed on the ground and quickly died and soaked. The color was difficult to erase. An assassin clutched his throat and made a gurgling sound. He fell dead on the snow with a muffled thud. The swordsman of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council slowly withdrew his cold sword from behind a tree. He bowed to Gauda, who was a few feet away, and disappeared into the snow again. The 7th. Gauda's face was serious. He still carried the long knife on his back. He said to his subordinate, in a moment, take it to the back of the mountain and burn it. Yes. Gauda was silent. Recently, there had been more and more assassins sneaking into Tsang Mountain with the intention of assassinating Commissioner Fan. He also knew where these assassins came from. Xinjiang was indeed somewhat crazy. After the Cui family was destroyed, they chose the most direct method of revenge. Unfortunately, they had clearly underestimated the defensive power around Commissioner Fan. The 7 Tiger Guards were the personal bodyguards the emperor had assigned to Fan Xian. However, in this small-scale battle of assassination and counter-assassination, the truly terrifying ones were the swordsmen of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. These swordsmen's profession was assassination. They were the official assassins of the Qin Kingdom. Now, in the snowy mountains, they were facing the assassins sent by Xinjiang. Naturally, they were incomparably skilled at killing them. Their defense was watertight. In less than 3 days, they had already killed 7 assassins without suffering any injuries themselves. Gauda looked at the smear of blood on the white snow and sighed. He was the emperor's personal guard in the palace. It was not until today that he realized that these Tiger Guards were very powerful when used to kill enemies head-on. However, when it came to assassination and protection, they were still a bit lacking compared to the people of the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council. As the leader of the Tiger Guards, he knew that if these 6th Bureau swordsmen fought him head-on, none of them would be his match. The problem was, assassins would never fight head-on. Gauda silently thought that if the head assassin of the 6th Bureau came to assassinate him, he would not have a sliver of a chance of survival. After Fan Xian was injured, the level of defense around him had already increased by a few levels. Particularly after Chen Pingping's outburst of anger, the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council finally reacted in shame. They directly placed 12 swordsmen around Fan Xian. In the past, this level of defense was only used by the emperor when he traveled. After the emperor frequently used the Tiger Guards, in the entire world, only Chen Garden would have such tight defenses. After Fan Xian learned of this, he did not give any orders. He only ordered the people of the Qinian unit to withdraw. Not a single person of the First Bureau was allowed to follow him into the mountains. Only Deng Ziyu and Su Wenmao were left to be responsible for communication. As for Chen Pingping's anger, he treated it as a joke. "You old cripple, had someone stab me, and now you're scolding your subordinates for not protecting themselves. How shameless." As Gauda was silently marveling at the power of the Overwatch Council, there were others who had similar thoughts. The leader of the assassins that Xinyang had sent to the Tsang Mountains was wearing a white robe. Hidden in the snow, he carefully observed everything in the mountains. He was a death soldier from Xinyang. He had long given his life to the eldest princess. But seeing the scene just now, he couldn't help but feel a chill in his heart. It had already been 3 whole days. Never mind assassinating Fan Xian, the Xinyang assassins had not even been able to see Fan Xian's face. The continuous, silent deaths of his subordinates made the leader of the assassins, for the first time, think of retreating. Even if it was the Emperor's Tiger Guards protecting Fan Xian, he had enough confidence to try. Xinyang guessed that Fan Xian's injuries were strange. They estimated that he would not recover for a while. But the problem was that the Overwatch Council, the 6th Bureau, and the official assassins were too powerful. They seemed to be able to instinctively smell every strange scent in the snowy mountains and could find all the hidden dangers. With such a group of people protecting Fan Xian, only if Xinyang sent an army up the mountain would they be able to kill him. The leader of the assassins furrowed his brows. He decided to slide down the tree trunk and return to Xinyang to report the details of this failure. He was very confident in his martial skills. As long as he made detailed arrangements for the 6th Bureau of the Overwatch Council, he would certainly be able to kill Fan Xian next time. His body moved slightly, and a speck of snow drilled into his neck. It was slightly cool, then extremely cold. A black metal drill, separated by a thick layer of snow, accurately pierced into his neck. To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 321. There was one thing in this world that was the God of all people, the soul of all gods, and even ghosts were forced to fight for it. On the Fan family carriages, one could often see the family crest of the Fan family, a square and a circle. It was the shape of this thing. Master Fan was the Minister of Revenue and controlled the national treasury. Young Master Fan was about to go to Jiangnan to take over the palace treasury. The wealth of the kingdom of Qing was controlled by this family, and even the family crest was full of the stench of money. Money. Money that people loved and hated. Money that could make people go to heaven and go to hell. Money that could make people laugh on a mountain of knives and dance crazily in a sea of fire. Not only did the people love money, but the court loved money even more. That was why they set up so many taxes. They wanted to scrape off 3 layers of land. As for the court of the kingdom of Qing, since the founding of the kingdom, they had begun to tax salt, iron, and tea in addition to land and corvée labor. Later, because of the sudden rise and fall of the Yi family, the palace treasury became the court's largest source of money. As for the glassware, liquor, toys, and ships produced by the palace treasury, the court naturally imposed heavy taxes. Furthermore, they were always guarded very strictly, and the Overwatch Council was in charge. So when the Chui family's smuggling was investigated by the Overwatch Council, it shocked the world. It was not until today that the people of the Kingdom of Qing knew that there was such a big gap in the palace treasury, and that the court had lost so much money in taxes. The imperial censorate was silent, and so were the officials who had been bribed by Xinyang. But there were still some officials from different factions or with righteous hearts who began to submit petitions, asking the court to investigate the matter thoroughly. Although no one dared to mention the eldest princess' name in the petitions, the spearhead was pointed directly at Xinyang. In comparison, the young emperor of Northern Qi also took advantage of the situation. The matter of Commissioner Fan of the Overwatch Council recovering on Tsang Mountain was intentionally or unintentionally left out. Although everyone knew that Commissioner Fan was the mastermind behind this operation, making it easier for him to take over the palace treasury next year, no one dared to say anything. On the contrary, the impulsive students of the Imperial College had already begun to prepare petitions, asking the emperor to transfer control of the palace treasury to young Master Fan. Fan Xian's reputation was indeed much better than that of the eldest princess. Naturally, part of this was due to the snowy words of the past. And in recent days, rumors began to spread among the teahouses and dining tables of the capital. It was said that Xinjiang had begun to send out crazy assassins to murder young Master Fan. The efficiency of the 8th Bureau of the Overwatch Council was indeed high. Not everyone could completely understand the conflict between Fan Xian and the eldest princess. Many lofty scholars had always been puzzled as to why the people of the world were so passionate about this kind of thing, to the extent that they would not hesitate to shed blood for it. For example, Shi Chanli. Although he was now a famous figure in the entertainment industry in the capital and the owner of the Baoyue brothel, he still did not understand this point. Why was the eldest princess so reluctant to let go of the palace treasury? Recently, he had even used such ruthless methods to deal with his son-in-law. She used the Chui and Ming families to smuggle to Dongyi and even overseas. Why did she dig so much silver from the palace treasury? Over the past 10 years, where did all the wealth she had plundered go? Nurturing soldiers. Fan Xian looked at the only student by his side and explained, "The army is all the emperors and the courts. Although Yan Xiaoyi is the noble governor of the north, if he wants to do anything in the future, I'm afraid he won't be able to stand up to the emperor's edict. You know, in our country, particularly in the army, how high the emperor's prestige is. If you want to contend with this kind of prestige, there is only one thing in the world that can have a certain effect. That is money," Fan Xian said with a smile. "A large amount of money. The monthly income of the officers under Yan Xiaoyi is so high that you would probably be dumbfounded if you heard about it. It is precisely because of this that Yan Xiaoyi is able to control the military power in his hands as firmly as possible." Shi Chanli stopped copying notes with his right hand and laughed bitterly. He had entered the mountains this time because he had been entrusted by the Imperial College to write the biography of Fan Xian, the current civil official of the Qing Kingdom. Ever since Fan Xian published Bangxian's Hai Shu Hua, his position in the world of poetry in the Qing Kingdom had been firmly established. Even when he left for northern Qi and brought back Master Zhuang's carriage of books, his influence spread even further. Of course, the Imperial College was proud of this young Master Fan, who had risen from the Imperial College's principal to the Ministry of Education. They did not want to miss out on this kind of resource, so they decided to write a biography of Fan Xian, which would be published by Donghua Bookstore and distributed to the world. This was to win over more students in the north and Dongyi in the coming year, and also to bring more scholars to the Qing Kingdom to participate in the spring examinations. But after Fan Xian was injured, he hid in the Tsang Mountains and did not go to the Imperial College for a long time. Even Shu the scholar could not find him, so he had to use his connections here and there to find Fan Xian's only student in the capital, Shi Chanli. Shi Chanli also felt that this matter was very promising, and with the Imperial College's personal invitation, he felt that it was much more glorious than being the owner of a brothel in Baoyue brothel. So he eagerly ran into the Tsang Mountains. He was lucky that he did not see the corpses in the snow. How could he have predicted that things would develop differently from what he had imagined? Although he had begged his teacher to stay in the study, his teacher did not talk about his life, his studies, or his poetry. Instead, he talked about the secrets of the court, such as how the Overwatch Council defeated the second prince, and why the eldest princess refused to let go of the palace treasury. Shi Chanli did not have the courage to write these things down on paper. Even if he did, the Imperial College would not dare to publish them even if they had 800 heads. He looked at his teacher and said in a chilly voice, "Teacher, these things can't be written into the biography." As for the matter of writing a biography, Fan Xian felt that it was ridiculous. He thought to himself that he was so young. Were the scholars of the Imperial College going to seal his coffin? Seeing Shi Chanli's awkward expression, he laughed and scolded him, "Right my ass." He cursed and then said, "Is the Imperial College so free that it has nothing better to do? When will they be able to sort out Master Zhuang's books? The Danbo bookstore is waiting to open the printing, and the Emperor is also rushing them. It's not like you don't know that the Emperor wants me to sort them out within 3 years. These freeloaders only know how to flatter me and don't know how to do proper work." Shi Chanli carefully explained on behalf of the Imperial College, "Master Zhuang's books have already begun to be printed in batches." Fan Xian shook his head and continued, "Then tell me about the absurd matter of writing a biography for me. Even though I've written a few poems, sung a few songs, and conversed with Master Zhuang twice in my life, don't you know that my most glorious career, the one that I'm truly proud of, is still these shady things?" These words were spoken truthfully, and were even close to Rizzo's self-analysis, except there was not a trace of remorse. "What I am most proud of is killing people and using poison, not those romantic things. If you can write them, do you dare to write them?" Fan Xian stared into Shi Chanli's eyes. "If you want to write a biography for me, wait until the day I die, or when the people of this era all die. If you are still struggling to live, it won't be too late to talk about it then." Shi Chanli sighed sorrowfully. He knew that the work of writing down notes could not be completed. His teacher had already made up his mind, and it would be difficult for him to convince him otherwise. However, he had already been intrigued by the court secrets that Fan Xian had spoken of earlier. Returning to his teacher's previous topic, he said, "Regarding the matter in the north, I think that General Yan Xiaoyi blindly uses money to buy loyalty. Even if he wants to rebel, I don't think it will be of much use." Under the influence of his teacher for half a year, Shi Chanli was like Cece from Danzhou. He had grown a lot bolder, and his words were also a lot sharper. "The Emperor has a tight grip on the army." Fan Xian raised his eyebrows. "The eldest princess doesn't have any loopholes to exploit. She only has a trusted aide like Yan Xiaoyi, so of course she has to throw out a lot of silver. Every bit of loyalty she can earn is a bit more. Although it costs a lot to raise soldiers, that is the palace treasury. Is 10 years only enough to do this? Of course not." Fan Xian explained like a teacher. "The second prince wants to bribe the officials of the capital. This requires money. He wants to control public opinion. This requires money. Xinyang wants to befriend the local officials, the feudal lords of a region. This also requires money. The word official has 2 mouths, and the officials of the kingdom of Qing are all very healthy. Their mouths are wide open. To feed these people, it really costs a lot." Shi Chanli frowned. "This is equivalent to rebellion." "You said that before." Fan Xian laughed. "Right now, it is only at the stage of the fight for the throne. If the second prince really succeeds, he will have imperial power in his hands. It will be very easy for him and his aunt to get back the silver they have given out." Fan Xian suddenly thought of the scene in The Deer in the Cauldron where Wei Xiaobao framed Wu Sangui. He laughed bitterly. Of course, once he becomes the emperor, he won't need to care about this small amount of money. The whole world will be his. Shi Chanli sucked in a breath of cold air. "Teacher, you want to take over the palace treasury, and you want to destroy the Chui family ahead of time. Isn't this cutting off the other side's source of money? This will cause great damage to the second prince's fight for the throne. No wonder Xinyang is so angry this time. Compared to the disturbance in the capital, their reaction is much stronger." Fan Xian laughed coldly. "Reaction? 5 or 6 years ago, that mother-in-law of mine began to react. His mind flashed back to 5 or 6 years ago, to that little building in Danzhou that had been burned to a crisp. It was in that building that he had killed someone for the first time. After entering the capital, Fan Xian used the power of the Overwatch Council to investigate this matter clearly. That year, Lady Lu wanted to poison him because of the 2 women in the palace. It was in that year that His Majesty first proposed the marriage between the Fan and Lin families. It was also the same as proposing the transfer of jurisdiction over the palace treasury. Although this marriage did not succeed for the time being under Chen Pingping's strong opposition, it still made the eldest princess wary. She did not want to easily let go of the enormous wealth she firmly controlled, so she had arranged for someone to kill Fan Xian. But no one could have imagined that 4 years later, when Chen Pingping was returning home to worship his ancestors, Fan Jian would bring up the matter again. Finally, he received His Majesty's permission. Thus, Fan Jian had Teng Zijing rush thousands of miles to bring Fan Xian from Danzhou to the capital. When he thought of the muddle-headed 12-year-old Fan Xian, he had already carried such a heavy burden on his shoulders, and had already gotten into so much trouble. Fan Xian, who had long since grasped power, still felt some lingering fear. And then there was the Nyolan Street incident. The second prince had invited him to a banquet, and the eldest princess had secretly instigated the second son of the Prime Minister's manor to organize a murder. Now that he thought about it, his mother-in-law had tried to kill him 3 or 4 times, but had not succeeded. Fan Xian smiled bitterly as he thought about it. All the dangers he had faced in his life seemed to have been carried out by the eldest princess, who was so beautiful it made people forget her age. Furthermore, the eldest princess had not personally taken action. She had only used some scheming methods to dirty other people's hands. This woman with an obsession with cleanliness, had actually used people from Xinjiang to assassinate him. It looked like she was truly angry and flustered. A confident smile rose to the corners of Fan Xian's lips. As long as you are angry, it is fine. If you were still as calm as before, I would not know how to act. He deeply believed in the Xinjiang princess's ability to scheme. Just from the Nyolan Street incident turning into a clever scheme to seize northern Qi's land, and the sale of Yan Bingyun in exchange for the Qing court's chaos, he could see the eldest princess's ability to scheme. But he was not afraid of this, because the Overwatch Council was also best at scheming. Sir Yan Jr. was also a genius, and he had an unresolvable hatred for the eldest princess. Most importantly, other than scheming, the Overwatch Council also had power, and this was what Xinjiang lacked the most. To deal with schemers, simple swords, blood, and fire were the most effective methods. The eldest princess is an amazing woman. Fan Xian woke up from his contemplation and sighed. Truly amazing. At the beginning, all the civil and military officials in the court thought she was helping the Eastern Palace. No one thought of her agreement with the second prince. Those in the court who hate her, such as my father-in-law who has already left the court, will unconsciously lean towards the second prince. And the people she controls on behalf of the Eastern Palace can be thrown out at any time to be villains. If this situation continues for another 7 or 8 years, when His Majesty is old, perhaps the second prince will really be able to enter the Eastern Palace. It's a pity she met the teacher, Shi Chanli said. Fan Xian was not modest. I was just a bit lucky. And do you think the Emperor and Director Chen really don't know about this? Shi Chanli was slightly surprised. Fan Xian smiled bitterly. No matter how amazing a woman the eldest princess is, in the end, she is still no match for those old fellows. I am just a hand pushed to the front stage. Perhaps the Emperor just doesn't want the Empress Dowager to be angry. He suddenly tilted his head slightly and looked at the vast expanse of white mountains outside the glass window. With a slight sense of loss, he said, however, among these powerful figures, the one I actually admire the most, is my father-in-law, who has long left Jingdo. Shi Chanli didn't understand. He had thought his teacher would say the one he admired the most was Minister Fan. Fan Xian smiled slightly. My father-in-law is known to the world as a treacherous minister, but he is actually a rare capable official. The Qing kingdom in the past few years could truly be said to be prosperous and the people at peace. Although there were small disagreements, in the end, they did not affect the overall situation. He made great efforts. What I admire about my father-in-law is that he is very patient and very decisive. At the beginning, because of the eldest princess, Sigu Jian killed my second brother-in-law. My father-in-law immediately agreed to my marriage to Wan and stood without hesitation on the side of the Overwatch Council and my father. Don't forget, he and Director Chen's father have fought for many years in court. For him to make such an important decision and immediately make a plan, it is truly extraordinary. He then sighed and said, furthermore, my father-in-law holds the power of the Prime Minister in his hands, but he is not attached to it. Once he discovered that the Emperor had other thoughts, he immediately resigned. Although he lost the power in his hands, at the end of the day, his family is safe, and his clan is peaceful. After Fan Xian's father-in-law, Prime Minister Lin Ruofu, retired, he had always lived out his retirement in Wuzhou. He was a wealthy man and often had correspondence with his family in Jingdo. It was said that he had been doing well recently. His health was even better than when he was in Jingdo. It is easy to understand others, but difficult to understand oneself, Fan Xian sighed and said. Father-in-law knows people, knows oneself, knows the time, and knows the situation. There is truly too much for me to learn. Shi Chanli's heart jumped slightly. He thought of how the court in Jingdo was still empty. It was only the officials of the Hall of Governmental Affairs who were helping with political affairs. In a small voice, he said, Teacher, in the future, you will eventually become the Prime Minister of the court. Fan Xian laughed bitterly and scolded, Don't test me. I have no interest, and I don't have the ability. How can governing a country be as simple as cooking a little fish? As for me, in the future, managing the Overwatch Council is where my interest lies. Managing the palace treasury is the Emperor's edict. I won't do anything else. Shi Chanli smiled and said, Teacher, your words are interesting. However, just mentioning these two things is enough to make others envious. Let me tell you something. You know that after my father-in-law retires, the Emperor does not plan to re-establish the position of Prime Minister. Fan Xian stood up and leaned on his walking stick. Moving to the window, he pushed it open and smelled the cool wind coming from the snow. Faintly, he said, the retiring master of the Bureau of Documents, Mr. Hu, has already risen by imperial edict and is coming to Jingdo. Shi Chanli paled in shock. Which Mr. Hu? How many others? Fan Xian did not turn around. Lightly, he said, when you and I were still children, that Mr. Hu pushed hard for the improvement of literature. The Emperor has ordered him to return to the capital as a scholar. In the future, there will be no place for the Minister of Appointments, Yan Hangshu. Qin Heng will also be the Jingdo garrison. The Hall of Governmental Affairs will be led by a few scholars. There is no possibility of re-establishing the position of Prime Minister. Shi Chanli was silent. A moment later, he sighed lightly and said, In the past, I only knew how to study and serve the court. Only now do I know that the matters of the court are incomparably complicated. It is not something that outsiders can guess. After a while, he became happy again. Although the things he heard today could not be recorded in history and were of no help to the Imperial College's advertising business, these secrets were never passed on. Since his teacher had told him today, decades later, if he had the opportunity to write this into the history of the country or publish a mountain-dwelling notebook of the master of Bangxianzhai, he would, without question, leave his name in the annals of history. Of course, his teacher had to be the victor of history. Thinking of this, he felt a faint excitement in his heart. For some reason, he heard his teacher look out the window and laugh. Do you know that Director Chen's true age is a bit younger than the emperor? Shi Chanli's joyful heart was greatly surprised. He had once seen Chen Pingping from afar and knew that the director was old and clumsy. It looked like he was about to sink into the yellow earth. Was he younger than the emperor in his prime? Younger by a month, Fan Xian said with a not quite there smile. The affairs of the court are too complicated. There is too much to worry about, so it naturally becomes like this. I wonder if, in the future, I will also age prematurely. Outside the window was a bleak expanse of snow. From the end of the corridor came the laughter of girls playing mahjong. Wuxia had shamelessly come again. Yi Ling, that bold and thick-skinned person, had also hurried back from Dingzhou. The Fan Manor's estate in the Tsang Mountains was always lively in the winter. Compared to last year, it seemed that only the little fatty in northern Qi was missing. Fan Xian narrowed his eyes and welcomed the cold wind that blew against his face. In complete contrast to the joyous mood at home, he was silent. Working for the emperor in this shitty court, just like Chen Pingping, was truly a very exhausting job. Everyone seemed to have a few faces at the same time. No one knew what kind of cards each person held in their hands. Fan Xian didn't know what other people's trump cards were, so he always held his trump cards tightly in his hands and would not easily play them out. Following a rustling sound, Deng Ziyu, draped in a black snowy robe, came to the front of the house. He was about to knock on the door when he found that the window was open. Commissioner Fan was waving at him. He was slightly surprised and walked over. In a low voice, he said, "The follow-up people from Xinyang have already retreated. The director sent Zhong Zhui to follow them." Fan Xian nodded. The official called Zhong Zhui and Wang Qinian were known as the Two Wings, and they were best at tracking. Fan Xian was not worried about his safety. Seeing the paper bag in Deng Ziyu's hand, he very naturally extended his hand. Inside the paper bag was the analysis of the intelligence reports drawn up by the Third Bureau, as well as the correspondence. Deng Ziyu's expression became somewhat strange. He chuckled and said, "There's a letter from the north." Fan Xian was surprised, but immediately understood. He laughed and scolded, "You're a man. Don't learn from those women's mouths." Deng Ziyu handed the paper bag to him, covered his mouth, and turned to leave. Looking at his subordinate's comical appearance, Fan Xian could not help but laugh again. Using the excuse that someone needed to watch over the capital, he chased Shi Chanli out the door. Only then did he break open the first seal on the outside of the large paper bag and pull out a stack of letters. He flipped through them and, not surprisingly, found Haitang's letter. Deng Ziyu's strange behavior earlier was naturally because of this letter. The Overwatch Council's seal used rosin and silver cinnabar. They did not use lamp coal, so the safety factor was higher. Furthermore, the envelope was specially seamless, so there was no need to worry about someone deftly opening it on the way. First, he read through the information from the Qinian unit in the capital, and then looked over the intelligence reports from the other places that the Third Bureau had presented. Fan Xian nodded with satisfaction. Progress in each place had been smooth. Yan Bingyun had acted very quickly, and the Chui family would not be able to escape. The news had spread to Jiangnan, and even the Chui family's in-laws, the Ming family, had begun to move their wealth and goods. This move of striking the mountain to scare the tiger was beginning to take effect. Finally, he glanced at the council reports and picked up the letter that Haitang had sent. This had always been his principle. When doing things, he should put the public first and then the private. But after he finished reading Haitang's seemingly ordinary letter, he regretted that he had read it too late, even if it was only for a short while. Because the contents of the letter were too shocking. Fan Xian's slender fingers gripped the thin paper, and he could not help but tremble. His expression was serious. Chapter 322. The content of Haitang's letter was very simple. The words and sentences were not overflowing with ancient meaning. It was written in the light style of Fan Anji. The full text was copied below. Is Anji safe? I've received the previous letter. Your country's postal route is indeed incomparably convenient. A month's journey took only 10 days. Counting back, you said it was the first snow in the capital when you wrote the letter. On that day, it had already snowed a few times in Shangjing, and it didn't stop. The weather was so cold that it was tiresome. I have a strange temperament. Others may easily get sleepy in spring and autumn, but I like to get sleepy in winter. It's just that the snow outside is heavy, and all the green is covered by the dull white. There are no beautiful scenery to entertain the eyes, no branches to break into rings, no flowers to get close to and smell. Although there are a few plum blossoms in the garden, the Qi kingdom is colder this year than in the past. The few wax-red buds bloom miserably, and after being frozen by the ice and snow, they have no energy at all. I can't bring myself to admire them. The donkey you saw has already been sold. Don't worry, the little fellow is still helping to pull the millstone. In any case, there aren't many soybeans, and it only needs to make 50 revolutions a day. With the money from selling the donkey, I bought some bamboo charcoal. You said that if the room's ventilation isn't good, it's easy to get poisoned, so I made a chimney according to the blueprints you sent. Needless to say, the air in the room is much better. The chicks have long grown up, but I'm still worried about them freezing, so I keep them in the house. Naturally, they don't smell good, but as you know, I have a servant now, so I clean and wash them every day. It's passable. Lord Wang came to the garden a few times and invited me to a meal. However, you said that he can't drink wine. After thinking about it, I rejected him. After all, you know that I like to watch people drink, and I especially like to watch people get drunk. Half a year ago, at the Pine House restaurant, I liked the little song you sang when you were drunk. It was the verdict from Story of the Stone, leaving you Qing. A few days ago, I sang it to my teacher, and he liked it very much. He said that Sister Qiao's life was pitiful, but there was something interesting about it that was worth pondering. That day, the wind and snow outside the house were very heavy, and the chill invaded the house. Teacher and I sat across from each other, drinking tea and laughing as we talked about the affairs of the ruler. I don't know why, but I thought of the days I spent with you in Shangjing a few months ago. It was clean and natural, and the feeling was extremely beautiful. It was as if I saw you, that bright moon, that small temple, that ridge of fields, and you ran out of the ridge in a sorry state. Right, there's a piece of news that shocked me. I heard that Lord Xiaofan's remains were discovered in the cliffs of the Western Mountains. Although he's already been buried, I thought about how you once traveled north with this old man, so I wanted to tell you so that you can rest at ease. When Fan Xian saw this, he only felt that it was a little strange. It seemed that there were many hidden meanings in the village girl's words, but he was so shocked by his brother's pitiful life that he laughed in spite of himself and didn't notice. Immediately after, he was pleasantly surprised by Haitang's words. Was she really willing to pass on the heart of Tianyi Dao to him? Thus, he still hadn't guessed the true message that Haitang wanted to pass on, but he thought about it again. Finally, from the finding of Xiaofan's body, Kuhi talking about him, and guessing riddles, he smelled an inauspicious feeling. Especially that line, Sister Qiao's life was pitiful, but it was interesting. He furrowed his brows and read it again. Finally, his gaze fell on the line, bright moon, small temple, and ridge of fields. The appearance of this line was rather abrupt and did not fit in with the rest of the text. This line was talking about the most embarrassing scene of Fan Xian's life. After he was drugged with an aphrodisiac, he tossed and turned, pulling up his pants and running out of the small temple. At that time, frogs croaked and the field was wet. This should be what Haitang wanted to tell him. Running out of the field from the ridge of fields? Fan Xian furrowed his brows, and a thought flashed through his mind. He put aside the 3 useless words about drinking in front of the bright moon temple and only looked at the last line. For Fan Xian, this kind of riddle seemed very simple. Running out of the field, it was naturally an ancient character. No, it was the character Yi. The leaf of the lotus leaf, the leaf of the lotus leaf. Yi Qingmei's leaf. Fan Xian's face was full of shock. His fingers holding the letter trembled slightly. Thinking of the secret words in the letter and his past, he immediately understood what Haitang wanted to tell him. He knew he was a descendant of the Yi family. He took a deep breath and rubbed his stiff cheeks, forcing himself to calm down. He didn't want this sudden news to throw his heart into chaos. The meaning in Haitang's letter was very clear. Since she had secretly sent him the message, it meant that He, who had already grasped the mystery of his past, already had a plan to release this information. That was why she was in such a rush to tell him and let him plan early. At this moment, there was no time to guess where the great grandmaster had gotten the ability to determine his relationship with the Yi family. The first question in front of Fan Xian was how he should face the upcoming situation. Judging from the time when Northern Qi released the news that he was a descendant of the Yi family, the rumors would grow wings and fly. At most, they would be a few days slower than the Overwatch Council's intelligence network. At the latest, within 10 days, presumably, the streets and alleys of Jingdou would begin to spread this news. Everyone would open their mouths wide behind his back to express their shock. Logically speaking, no one would be able to obtain any concrete evidence. No one could prove that Fan Xian was a descendant of the Yi family. At most, Northern Qi would just release a few rumors. But, Fan Xian knew that rumors had great destructive power. Once something happened, people would purposely and extremely dig up some of the oddities after he entered the capital because of this rumor and gradually believe this truth. Furthermore, this was the truth. The human heart was a wondrous thing. Before someone thought of something, they would not connect Fan Xian to the Yi family for no reason. But, once someone started it, this seed of suspicion would be planted in the heart and gradually take root and sprout. It would take over everything in the heart and turn a rumor into a universally acknowledged knowledge. It was just that no one dared to say it out loud. As for those people in the past, those in the palace, and those who had conflicts of interest with him, the fact that he was a descendant of the Yi family would certainly make them suddenly see the light. They would be the ones who believed this the most. Only, he didn't know how his past would be used by the other party. Fan Xian's lips were a bit dry. He turned around and picked up the teapot on the table and gulped down 2 mouthfuls. The tea had been added by Shi Chanli later, so it was a bit hot. It made him shiver. After a moment of shock, he viciously threw the teapot to the ground and cursed a few times. With a bang, the porcelain teapot fell to the ground and shattered. Porcelain shards flew in all directions. It wasn't that he hadn't thought about the day when his mysterious past would be exposed by someone. Furthermore, regarding this half of the Yi family, he was filled with anticipation. There would come a day when he would loudly say in front of the entire world that he was Yi Qingmei's son. But, it shouldn't be like this. Before Fan Xian had any time to prepare his thoughts or take action, this shocking news would spread throughout Jingdou and bring him unpredictable danger and powerful shock. No one would know what would happen. Fan Xian hated this feeling of being passive. He was also slightly afraid that, for the first time, the situation had completely left his control. That was why he felt helpless and angry. His feet stepped over the broken porcelain shards and walked with a wooden expression to the open glass window. Looking at the cold snow and north wind outside, he was silent for a long time. He didn't know how many times he took a deep breath before he finally calmed down and began to prepare to face this sudden situation. At this moment, the servant girls who had heard the noise in his room hurried over. They were frightened by his unsightly expression and didn't dare to enter the room to tidy up. Fan Xian shook his head and waved his hand to signal for the servant girls to leave. He picked up the stack of letters again and prepared to destroy them all. As usual, he clasped his hands together and wanted to crush the letters into powder. Unexpectedly, the letters were rolled up, but they did not break. He was slightly startled, and a bitter smile rose to the corner of his lips. Haitang's letter had shocked him so much that he had forgotten the pitiful state of having no Xinqi in his body. Going around the winding corridor, he came to the quietest room in the manor. Fan Xian didn't knock on the door. He pushed it open and entered. Although he had no Xinqi, he had brute force. The doorpost gave a crisp crack and broke. Fei Jia, who was carefully mixing pills in the room, raised his somewhat tired face and looked at his student. He coughed and said, "What happened? Why are you so flustered?" Fan Xian looked at his teacher and said directly, "Sir, something big is going to happen." Fei Jia was startled. What could have caused this little monster to be so flustered? After Fan Xian told him the news that Haitang had risked her life to send, Fei Jia also immediately panicked. He rubbed his powder-covered hands and tangled his messy hair. He couldn't say anything for a while. Fan Xian looked at this scene and couldn't help but sigh to himself. He knew that coming to find his teacher in a moment of desperation was not a good idea. Fei Jia was a grandmaster when it came to refining poison to kill people, but when it came to making decisions and scheming against the enemy, that was not his strong point. "I'll go down the mountain immediately. I'll go down the mountain immediately." Master and disciple spoke at the same time. They looked at each other and immediately understood what the other meant. Fei Jia narrowed his brown eyes, which were full of murderous intent. "I'll go to Chen Garden. You go find the minister. We'll split up." Yes, when the situation developed like this, master and disciple thought of the two old foxes in the capital at the same time. Fan Xian bowed with a headache and turned to order his subordinates to arrange a carriage. Just as he was about to leave, Fei Jia suddenly said, "Don't be afraid." Fan Xian turned his head in shock. Fei Jia's voice was sharp. With a not quite there smile, he said sinisterly, "Don't be afraid, kid. What happened a dozen years ago will not happen again. Master and disciple can poison tens of thousands of people to death and then kill our way out of the capital. Who can stop us?" Fan Xian shivered. His teacher was indeed looking out for him, but he was afraid that he was not as ruthless as him. There was no time to say anything to the girls in the manor. They only said goodbye to Cici, who was embroidering. Fan Xian and Fei Jia split up into two carriages and followed the difficult snowy mountain road down Tsang Mountain. Along the way, the wheels of the carriage crushed countless pieces of ice and rolled up a few threads of cold mud. The guards in charge of protection were split into two groups. Half of the swordsmen of the 6th Bureau followed these two people down the mountain. Gouda and the Tiger Guards were carefully left on the mountain by Fan Xian. In the evening, the carriage Fei Jia was in entered the manor on the outskirts of the capital, which was even more magnificent and noble than the royal palace under tight security. "Old Fei?" The old servant guarding the door saw Sir Fei disembark from the carriage with a cold expression. He couldn't help but feel confused. He wasn't sure what had happened. In a short while, the garden was brightly lit. Fei Jia and Chen Pingping in the wheelchair walked out of the garden gate with serious expressions. Under the protection of the attendants, they climbed into the carriage. Entering the palace, Chen Pingping said coldly. However, as soon as he finished speaking, his expression immediately softened and he said softly, "And here I was wondering how important the matter was for the two of you to be so flustered." Fei Jia rubbed his hands together in shock. "If this isn't a big thing, then what is?" Chen Pingping gently stroked the smooth handles of the wheelchair and laughed mockingly. "You old man, you're soaking in medicine every day. It's one thing if you don't understand at once, but Fan Xian disappoints me greatly. As long as you pay a little attention, you'll know that this matter is not a problem. Never mind, child. This matter has been suppressed in his heart for too long. Now that it has been exposed by someone, it's inevitable that he will feel some fear. The carriage rattled toward Jingdo. In a short while, it passed through the city gates. The gates were not yet closed. Of course, even if they were closed, if the director of the Overwatch Council wanted to enter the capital, even the Qin family of the Jingdo garrison would not dare to stop him. When the carriage was about to reach the royal palace, Chen Pingping opened his eyes and lightly said, "This is not a bad thing. It is a good thing." Fei Jia shook his head. "I don't care. I'm going to go to the council and have the people of the 8th Bureau prepare." The sound of keys being unlocked came from the palace gates. Chen Pingping had the exclusive right to enter the palace at any time. His position was extraordinary. The old man tilted his head to listen to the familiar voice. Without expression, he said, "After the news reaches Jingdo, have them suppress it for a few days." At least this kind of superficial effort has to be put on for people to see. As for Fan Xian's past, there will come a day when it will be revealed. Now is the best time. In the study of Fan Manor, the Minister of Revenue of the Qin Kingdom, Fan Jian, was sipping on a sour berry as he looked at Fan Xian in front of him. A mocking smile appeared at the corner of his lips. "Finally, seeing you so anxious, I always thought your heart was made of ice." Fan Xian smiled bitterly. "Father, at this time, why are you still joking? When the news reaches Jingdo, what exactly should we do?" He looked into his father's eyes and was silent for a moment. Faintly, he said, "Since this matter has been hidden from the world for so many years, presumably there is someone who does not want me to appear." Fan Jian looked at his son with clear eyes and quietly said, "But the reality is that you have already appeared, and appeared very beautifully. In the end, your relationship with the Yi family cannot be hidden forever. If you want to choose a time to expose it, I believe that now is the best time." Chapter 323. The best time? Fan Xian looked at his father in confusion. For some reason, seeing his father so calm, his mood also relaxed. He was no longer as anxious as he had been in the mountains. He laughed self-mockingly, tossed aside the crutch under his arm, and sat down in the chair. "Be careful of your wound." Fan Jian shook his head and said disapprovingly. Fan Xian smiled and gently rubbed the area below his chest. There was a faint pain inside, but with Sir Fei's skillful nursing, it was more or less healed. "Tell me, what exactly are you afraid of?" Fan Jian gently stroked the long beard on his chin. The minister, who had always been upright and serious, finally revealed a sense of confidence and confidence. Fan Xian was startled. He furrowed his brows and thought for a while. Only then did he realize that he had indeed panicked. What exactly was he afraid of? He sorted out his hidden worries in his heart and said sincerely, "If this news spreads, the discussions of the people under heaven will be unusually turbulent. If the palace knows of my past, who knows how it will be handled?" "Handled?" Fan Jian laughed coldly. "Do you think the palace still doesn't know of your past?" Fan Xian fell silent. He knew his father was right. The emperor knew better than anyone that he was a descendant of the Yi family. As for the Empress Dowager, looking at her expression at the winter solstice lamb banquet, he guessed that she had long known. It was just that this mother and son pair had hidden it from the world. They wanted to hide it from the world, but they can't hide it anymore. "The development of things will always change," Fan Xian said calmly. "Furthermore, if the Empress knows I am a descendant of the Yi family, what will she think? Based on what you said, there is an irreconcilable grudge between the Yi family and her." Fan Jian shook his head and said coldly, "There is no need to consider the Empress. This woman is the weakest empress in history. What you need to consider is whether or not the crown prince of the Eastern Palace will be persuaded by her to deal with you. The empress's family power had been completely wiped out by the Qing emperor a dozen years ago on the night Jingdo bled with blood. Fan Jian, who had never shown his power, had played the biggest role in it. Of course, he knew that the empress would not be able to make any moves. The crown prince. Fan Jian's lips curved into a faint smile. He's a smart man. With your current status and power, he only wants you to maintain balance. Why would he take the initiative to flirt with you because of what happened in the past? Fan Xian lowered his head slightly. A moment later, he said, "Where is the eldest princess?" Everyone under heaven knew that the Yi family's property had been taken by the Qing royal family and became the present palace treasury. Back then, when they forcibly seized the #1 merchant house in the world, they naturally used a very frightening excuse, such as treason. But now, there was suddenly a legendary orphan of the Yi family. Should they investigate the crimes of the past? Even if they didn't investigate, in the eyes of many people, the descendants of the Yi family were targets that the royal family had to eliminate. This was the rule of history, and no one could escape it. After the news that Fan Xian was a descendant of the Yi family spread, the eldest princess would certainly use this matter to make a big deal out of it, forcing the palace to respond accordingly. Tracing back to the matter of the Yi family's property being seized, according to the usual methods of the royal family, it would be good enough if Fan Xian wasn't secretly killed, let alone a meteoric rise. Of course, the other half of Fan Xian's past was also very strange, so he didn't have to worry about the mother and son in the palace trying to kill him. In fact, they wouldn't even see him as someone they needed to be wary of. But what annoyed him was that the world didn't know this truth. If the mother and son in the palace wanted to hide it from the world for a long time, they could only treat Fan Xian as a pure descendant of the Yi family. Under the pressure of public opinion, they could let Fan Xian and the palace treasury, and even the Overwatch Council leave. For Fan Xian, who had already made countless enemies, losing the power in his hands was quite dangerous. The eldest princess? Fan Jian's face was expressionless. If she was smart enough, she would watch from the sidelines this time and not act. Why? Because of the emperor's intentions. Fan Xian was deep in thought, and he gradually understood what his father meant. Of course, the emperor was someone who knew of his past. Although he didn't know what the emperor would do in the future, at least for now, he had no intention of lifting the cloth on the table. After learning of this matter, presumably the emperor's reaction was the same as his. After the shock, he felt a glimmer of anger and madness. The emperor and Fan Xian were both people who liked to control everything, so it was a taboo for things like this to happen that were out of control. Thus, the emperor would certainly be very angry. His first thought would be to find the person who leaked the secret. If the eldest princess took this opportunity to attack Fan Xian on a large scale, the emperor would instead protect Fan Xian with great strength and distance himself from the eldest princess in his heart. Fan Jian faintly said, "You are now the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. Through the actions of this half a year, you have sufficient power in your hands. From Danzhou to Jingdo, regardless of whether it is me or Director Chen, everything we have done is to help you forge the foundation under your feet a bit more firmly. You are now a heavy stone, how can you be afraid of the cool breeze brushing against your face? Don't worry, those winds can no longer move you." Fan Xian was silent. He had other worries in his heart. Of course, there are also celestial winds in this world, Fan Jian mockingly said. What you are afraid of is nothing more than the attitude of the palace. However, the Empress Dowager and the Emperor both know of this matter. At most, they will temporarily give you the cold shoulder for a few days due to public opinion. In the end, how this matter develops will depend on the Emperor's attitude. In the end, this experienced and far-sighted Minister of Revenue said, through the assassination in the Hanging Temple, the emperor believes deeply in your loyalty, so he will be partial to you. Right now, your injuries have not healed. The emperor will always remember your contributions. At this time, your past has been exposed. The emperor will do his best to think on your behalf. Regardless of whether it is the interests of the royal family, the empress, the crown prince, or even the pressure of the eldest princess and empress dowager, compared to the sword you blocked for the emperor, the two cancel each other out, Fan Jian smiled coldly. Thus, this is the best opportunity. You know these things in the palace even if I don't say it. Perhaps after a few years, the emperor's fondness for you for saving the emperor will fade and you will no longer be able to use it. Exposing your past can only be done in a few days. Not earlier, not later. This was the best opportunity. Fan Xian savored the coldness in these words in his heart. A bitter smile rose to his face. I am just worried that this matter will bring trouble to my family. The Fan family took in the orphan of the Yi family. Although this was the emperor's arrangement, if things got out of hand, the emperor would certainly not admit to it. The Fan manor would be the unlucky ones. Fan Jian slowly closed his eyes. A gratified smile appeared at the corner of his lips. Slowly, he said, silly child. If even you cannot make a move, why would they make a move on me? If the court makes a move on me, does that not prove that you are a descendant of the Yi family? Fan Xian's eyes widened. A moment later, he said, you mean, no matter what the outside world says, we will not admit to it even if we die? Of course. Fan Jian smiled. Who can have proof? Fan Xian sighed. What a shame. I originally thought that since there would not be any repercussions, I could use this opportunity to reverse the verdict for the Yi family. Fan Jian laughed loudly. No wonder you were so nervous earlier. You had big plans. Child, why must the cases of this world be overturned in the open? A dozen years ago, the emperor had already overturned the case for the Yi family once. This is just the aftermath. Fan Xian shook his head. Lowering his voice, he said, the matter of being a descendant of the Yi family should not scare me. It's just. He was going to say that he was worried that the eldest princess and others with ulterior motives would guess that he carried royal blood. But just as the words were about to leave his lips, he suddenly realized and stopped. Regarding his relationship with the emperor, Fan Xian and his father had never talked about it directly. All this time, father and son had wisely not brought it up. They did their best to maintain the current harmonious scene. Fan Jian understood what his son wanted to say. He fell silent. After a long time, he sighed. That matter, you should hide it in your heart. As for whether or not other people can guess it, what does it matter? I will say it clearly. Director Chen has probably been happily waiting for this matter to happen. After the rumor reaches Jingdo, he will certainly use the power in his hands to forcefully suppress the rumor and thus confirm this rumor. Then, he will wait for the people under heaven to gradually guess your past. At least, he will let the people under heaven get used to the rumor of your past. Fan Xian was silent. He knew his father's calculations were very reasonable. The old cripple's way of doing things was obvious. Forcefully suppressing the rumor of a descendant of the Yi family could make the people of the Qin kingdom believe this rumor. This was a very clever method. As for the matter of him being the emperor's illegitimate child, what exactly does Chen Pingping want to do? Fan Xian's mood suddenly became very tired. He asked his father weakly. I don't know. The minister, who had never displayed his strength or intelligence, slowly said, you should have guessed that Director Chen and I have never thought the same way. On the matter of you, I have argued with him for many years. Furthermore, I don't have the habit of trusting him. Strangely, he also doesn't seem to trust me. On the contrary, he and I trust you a bit more. He glanced at his son and laughed self-mockingly. In the end, it seems that he still won and successfully dragged you into this mess. He continued lightly, I even suspect that this matter was single-handedly done by him. Otherwise, how could the Northern Qi people know that Xiao Yezi is your mother? Of course, you don't have to worry too much right now. Presumably, Director Chen has already entered the palace to help you plan the end of this matter. Father and son fell silent. After a long time, Fan Xian suddenly and thoughtlessly said, Sorry, father. It was a very unreasonable apology. He didn't know what he was apologizing for. Was he apologizing for the fact that, in the end, he had taken over the Overwatch Council and was forced onto the path of power struggle? Was he apologizing for not choosing a more peaceful life like his father? Or was he apologizing for his strange past and bringing unknown danger to the Fan family? Or was he apologizing on behalf of his mother to his father? Or, sorry, I really want to be your true son, it's just that my mother won't give me this opportunity. Minister Fan was guessing whether or not Chen Pingping had used Fan Xian's injuries to save the emperor. This was the best opportunity to expose his identity as a descendant of the Yi family. At the same time, deep in the palace, Chen Pingping was also endlessly guessing who had suddenly created this mess. Politicians did not care much about those things in name, so these two old foxes only hoped that Fan Xian could live a happy life and hold power in his hands. They did not think that Fan Xian had to return to the Yi family in a proper manner. The only people who know of this matter are me, Fan Jian, Madame Fan, His Majesty, and Fei Jie. Chen Pingping sat in his wheelchair, and his dry and slightly sharp voice rang out in the royal study. His Majesty said earlier that the Empress Dowager found out about this matter after the spring imperial examinations. That means that there were only 6 people. In my opinion, none of these 6 people could have leaked it. The Emperor slowly turned around. His usually clear eyes were burning with anger today. They were as sharp and vicious as an eagle's. None of them could have leaked it. Then how did the Northern Qi people find out? After the spring imperial examinations, Fan Xian's identity as the commissioner of the Overwatch Council was exposed. From then on, he became the most famous of the young officials of the Kingdom of Qing. Especially since he was about to take control of the palace treasury, this kind of power was truly overwhelming. Normal people wouldn't have been able to guess anything, but the Empress Dowager deep in the palace had long been involved in the affairs of the state. She was used to seeing dark and filthy things, and her sense of politics was quite sharp. Under her forceful interrogation, the emperor finally admitted to his mother that Fan Xian was his illegitimate son. After the Empress Dowager recovered from her shock, she finally accepted this reality. After all, no matter how much she hated the witch of the past, there was always a degree of tolerance for the royal bloodline. Perhaps the Northern Qi people guessed it, Chen Pingping said to himself in a low voice, but he didn't know that he had guessed the answer closest to the truth. The emperor laughed coldly. What kind of person is Ku He? Does the imperial advisor of Northern Qi dare to come to a conclusion based on mere speculation? Chen Pingping was silent for a long time before saying, the eldest princess is the most suspicious. If Fan Xian had been eavesdropping at this moment, he would certainly have yelled out in praise. What was this? This was the legendary, great skill without work, great sound without sound, and running naked, framing. The Empress Dowager knew that Fan Xian was a descendant of the Yi family, and the eldest princess was the Empress Dowager's most beloved daughter. She had once backhandedly sold Yan Bingyun to Northern Qi, and had also had private dealings with the Northern Qi aristocrat Zhuang Mohan. She had private correspondence with the Northern Qi Empress Dowager, and her smuggling routes to Northern Qi had saved the people of Northern Qi who knew how much silver. Because of the transfer of the palace treasury, she hated Fan Xian to the bone. She had even begun to use assassinations, but she had failed. These were all facts that the emperor was well aware of. As long as one analyzed it carefully, one would find that the eldest princess had the highest possibility of knowing of this matter. She had the best way to pass the information through northern Qi. Most importantly, she had the greatest motive. Chen Pingping's earlier words were also very particular. If he had vaguely and secretly pointed out that there was someone in the palace who had good relations with northern Qi and thus made the emperor think of his sister far away in Xinyang, he would not have dared to be so rebellious and directly point out the eldest princess's name. The emperor would certainly have been a little suspicious of his intentions. Yet, for him to so directly and openly say the eldest princess's name, saying that she was the most suspicious, was the performance of a purely loyal official. He only cared about whether or not his opinion would be useful to the emperor, and did not care about whether or not it would cause the emperor to suspect him. This kind of performance, of course, greatly pleased the always shrewd emperor. The emperor fell silent, but his expression appeared somewhat ugly. After a moment, he said, "It looks like Yunrui does not know Fan Xian, does not know that Nji is my flesh and blood." If the Empress Dowager had also told this matter to the eldest princess, then the eldest princess would certainly not have exposed Fan Xian's past, because that would no longer be targeting Fan Xian, but targeting the emperor. Chen Pingping nodded slightly. From the emperor's words, he knew that the emperor already believed that the eldest princess was the source of this rumor. After a moment, the emperor coldly said, "Wait for the news and see if Yunrui will send a letter." Fan Xian was a descendant of the Yi family. If the eldest princess sent a letter to the palace and used this as an opportunity to persuade the emperor to be wary of this matter, or to directly persuade his brother to kill Fan Xian and destroy the Fan family, then the emperor would truly look lightly on the relationship between brother and sister. "What should we do next?" Chen Pingping coughed. Because he had entered the palace in a hurry, his grizzled hair had not been tied up too tightly. It was a bit disheveled and made him appear even older. The emperor glanced at him and suddenly smiled bitterly and sighed. "This life of mine can be considered glorious. Who would have thought that in my prime, I would become a true loner? Other than you and brother Jian, I can't find anyone I can completely trust." Chen Pingping was slightly startled and was about to say something when the emperor sighed and waved his hand. "Do you remember what reason the Empress Dowager used to expropriate the Yi family?" "Rebellion." "Yes." The emperor expressionlessly said, "Back then, the two of you also approved of this suggestion. After all, the things Xiao Yezi left behind could not be messed up or let go. After she left, only the royal family had the power to collect them and protect the Yi family's businesses to continue operating." "Correct." Chen Pingping calmly said, "At the time, I thought that since she was already gone, she probably wouldn't mind if I put a crime on her. I didn't think that 17 years later, it would become somewhat troublesome." The emperor coldly said, "What's so troublesome about it? The edict came from my mouth. If I rehabilitate the Yi family, who in the world would dare to make irresponsible remarks? You can't." Chen Pingping's resolute and decisive reply seemed to have exceeded the emperor's expectations. "Your Majesty feels pity for that child, but this matter must not be done. After all, your Majesty must consider the feelings of the elderly." The old cripple's heart was like a mirror. Although the emperor's move had no name, it was the last test. The emperor knew he was talking about the Empress Dowager. After thinking for a while, he nodded and said, "It looks like you already have a plan in mind." Chen Pingping smiled bitterly and replied, "This matter happened suddenly, and your Majesty did not have an edict, so there was no plan prepared." The meaning of these words was clear. The emperor had always wanted Fan Xian's past to remain hidden. Of course, the council had not thought of this matter. His tone changed and he continued, "However, it is not a big problem. If there is a letter from Xinyang, ask your Majesty to severely reprimand them. Your Majesty will also warn a few princes. As for Fan Xian's side, make him refuse to admit it no matter what. Even if the officials are suspicious, presumably no one would dare to submit any memorials based on baseless rumors. And Xi will inevitably feel awkward. How will he conduct himself in court? In the next year, he will have to go far away to Jiangnan on official business. He can coincidentally avoid this discussion. Chen Pingping smiled in a small voice. Your Majesty, although this matter is troublesome, now that it has exploded, the timing is not bad. Have Fan Xian far away from important places in Jingdou. If this drags on for 2 years, the matter will naturally fade away. Can it fade away? The emperor narrowed his eyes and asked. Sea Lily is on Lujing River. People say she is the descendant of some prince. It has been passed on. Other than making the pleasure boat's business a little better, there are no major problems. As for Fan Xian's past, Chen Pingping sighed. Let the world have one more piece of harmless gossip. The emperor thought deeply for a long time and then made a sound of agreement through his nose. The newspapers can also use this matter to make some splendor, Chen Pingping continued. The emperor also smiled. However, we have to guard against that matter. Chen Pingping glanced at the emperor and spoke with a glimmer of sorrow. As for the empress, I will have my mother appear. The emperor nodded and sighed. If I can't give him a title, I have already let down this son of mine. Half a month later, a piece of news began to spread through the streets and alleys of Jingdou. The news said that the currently popular Sir Fan Jr. in court, the commissioner of the Overwatch Council, was actually the descendant of the old Yi family. It had been nearly 20 years since the Yi family had been sealed off for treason. Unexpectedly, there were still descendants, and it was the Sir Fan Jr. that the people of Jingdou loved to talk about. After this rumor shocked the people of Jingdou, they began to become excited. They all whispered to each other and spread this gossip. In less than 2 days, the entire Jingdou knew of this rumor. If this rumor was true, then the Fan Manor, which was harboring a court criminal, was in for a bloody misfortune. The officials of Jingdou who had been greatly offended by Fan Xian began to excitedly plan an attack. Of course, under the circumstances that the palace had not spoken, these officials did not dare to act on their own. After all, it was only a rumor and there was no proof. Thinking of how Fan Xian would rather give up a generation of literary fame to enter the Overwatch Council and take over the palace treasury that reeked of money, the people of Jingdou and officials all began to mutter in their hearts. They began to believe the truth of this rumor a little more. Unexpectedly, the palace maintained its silence. It was as if no one had heard of this matter. However, the Overwatch Council began to move. Risking the danger of being scolded by the imperial censors, the 8th Bureau began to arrest the common people in the restaurants and tea houses who dared to spread the rumor. In the afternoon, in Yishir Tavern, the customers in the tavern looked at each other. They were all people of some status, but they did not expect the officials of the 8th Bureau of the Overwatch Council to be so unreasonable and arrest the 2 scholars who had been spouting spittle. From the reaction of the Overwatch Council, people increasingly believed that Commissioner Fan must have had some connection to the old Yi family. Inside the Overwatch Council, Chen Pingping, with a wool blanket on his knees, lifted a corner of the black curtain and looked at the silent people walking on the street. A strange smile rose to the corners of his lips. I know who your mother is, but I don't know who your father is. What are you afraid of? My book friend Ryu is so cute. A few days ago, my stomach was in so much pain. After reading that post, I laughed until my stomach hurt even more. Chapter 324. After the officials of the 8th Bureau of the Overwatch Council took the 2 scholars away, Yishir Tavern became much quieter. But the wine made the scholars brave, and not long after, they began to talk noisily again. What they talked about was nothing more than the rumors about Commissioner Fan's past. The Yi family was guilty of treason. After the mysterious mistress passed away, all the family property was taken into the palace treasury, someone said worriedly. If young Sir Fan really is that mistress's orphan, I think this is going to be troublesome. Treason? Then why did the shopkeepers of Qingyu Hall keep him so white and fat? A scholar with thick eyebrows said mockingly, I think the imperial court took advantage of the time when there were no widows and orphans to forcibly seize the family property. Now that the Yi family suddenly has an heir, I think the imperial court will panic. Panic? Didn't His Majesty want Commissioner Fan to manage the palace treasury? The palace treasury belongs to his family. How can he manage it? The palace treasury? Another snorted. I think Commissioner Fan is going to be out of luck soon. The shopkeeper wiped his cold sweat and came over. Gentlemen, can you keep your voices down? If the men of the Overwatch Council hear this, how can I keep my little shop open? The shopkeeper of Esher Tavern rarely came out to see guests, but today he came upstairs. A few familiar guests stood up to greet him. The shopkeeper looked around and listened to the drunken gossip. Esher Tavern was the property of the Chui family. Recently, the Chui family was on the verge of collapse. Suddenly hearing the rumors about their enemy, Commissioner Fan's past, the Chui family couldn't help but be secretly delighted. They watched the situation develop. The young man who claimed that the court had seized the Yi family property was indeed bold after drinking. He laughed and said, Shopkeeper, what are you afraid of? Can the Overwatch Council really shut the mouths of the world? Even if they dare, His Majesty won't allow it. Look at those people who were brought back to the Overwatch Council yesterday. Didn't they come back safe and sound today? It's just a small talk. It's not like they broke the law. The man next to him still looked worried. Commissioner Fan, this is not going to be easy. If he really is a descendant of the Yi family, his career will probably end here. In reality, these words were not completely said. After all, they were not officials and were in a restaurant in broad daylight. No one dared to speak the true judgment in their hearts. In these people's hearts, they thought that after the court learned of Fan Xian's past, they would first take away his position, and secondly, they would probably take away his life. What about Fan Manor? The man then sighed and said, Minister Fan has managed the Ministry of Revenue these years and is a famous and capable official. Is his family going to be ruined because of his romantic debts? After the rumor entered the capital, other than speculations about Fan Xian's past, the thing that the people of Jingdo talked about the most was the Minister of Revenue, Fan Jian. They talked about how he had tricked the mysterious mistress of the Yi family into his hands, and how he had caused her to secretly bear a child. Everyone knew that Minister Fan had been a dissolute ace on the Lujing River, but they did not expect him to have the ability to attract the mistress of the greatest merchant in the world. But as the rumor spread, the young ladies and pretty daughters of humble families had developed a completely different feeling about Minister Fan. Back then, the Yi family had committed a great crime of rebellion. Fan Jian, who was a low-ranking official at the time, had been able to keep the child he had with that woman alive, and had not been discovered by the people of the palace. He had taken great risks to raise the child for so many years. This story seemed to be enough to be rewritten into a novel, and it had the potential to become a popular romance novel. Until now, people seemed to finally understand why Fan Jian had kept Fan Xian in Danzhou for 16 years and had not allowed him to enter the capital. Seeing the panic of the 8th Bureau of the Overwatch Council, people knew that this rumor must have been very accurate. But with the emperor in power, Commissioner Fan was not Chen Pingping. He could not cover the sky with one hand, and he did not dare to invite all the chatty people of the capital to the 8th Bureau for tea. In the end, he could only watch in shock as the matter gradually spread. For example, the people who had been arrested yesterday had been released today. This was clear proof. As a result, people no longer resented the young Commissioner Fan for doing something so taboo as sealing the way of speech. Instead, they felt a trace of sympathy for this young official, whose future was uncertain and life and death uncertain. After all, Fan Xian had gained a very good reputation in the kingdom of Qing over the past 2 years. Regardless of whether it was inside or outside the city, he had won a lot of face for the court. Thinking of his imminent misfortune, the common people still had some feelings for him, especially when they thought of his mother, who had disappeared without a trace because of a groundless case of rebellion. The Yi family? Which Yi family? At this time, in the restaurant, a young man suddenly asked stupidly. He had been listening for a long time, but he still did not know the origin of the Yi family, which was related to Sir Fan Jr. After all, the events of that year had happened too long ago. Time flowed like water, and too many people in the kingdom of Qing had almost forgotten that shining golden name. You don't even know the Yi family? Some of the older people began to laugh disdainfully. As expected, they were just some kids who hadn't even fully grown their beards. They didn't even know the once illustrious Yi family, and yet they all felt the need to teach the other a lesson. The Yi family was the greatest merchant in the world back then, the middle-aged man leisurely said. It was the Yi family that made glass and sold it as silver. Someone objected, thinking that this point was not made clear. The Yi family that made soap and perfume. Oh, the perfume has been discontinued for over a decade. You probably haven't had the luck to smell it. The Yi family, the only family that can make strong alcohol. Someone else added, the Yi family that provided a large portion of the military equipment for the court back then. Do you know the palace treasury? Do you know where the Qing kingdom spends so much silver every year? The middle-aged man laughed mockingly. The palace treasury earned it from northern Qi, from Dongyi, and even from the sea. And what is the palace treasury? Isn't it the property of the old Yi family back then? The young man who had asked the question was flabbergasted. He opened his mouth wide and said, "My God, that's amazing." The bravest scholar, who had pointed directly at the court and seized the family property, shook his head and laughed coldly. If the Yi family was only a merchant, how could they have developed to such a scale back then? If they were only a merchant, how could they have been destroyed? The middle-aged man asked curiously, "Oh, perhaps you know some news?" The Yi family. The scholar shook his head and sighed. Rumor has it that they have a close relationship with the Overwatch Council. When the Overwatch Council was first established, it was said that all of the income was provided by the Yi family. Of course, this is only a legend. The middle-aged man was silent for a moment. Suddenly, a light flashed through his mind. He said to the people around him, "Everyone, do you remember the stone tablet in front of the Overwatch Council's door?" Everyone nodded. Suddenly, their expressions changed as they thought of something. They all cried out in surprise. Could it be that the person called Yi Qingmei was the mistress of the Yi family? The scholar's expression also changed slightly. He sighed. No wonder Sir Fan Jr. would rather give up his noble and scholarly reputation and sully his body to work in the Overwatch Council. I'm afraid he knew about this. He said with surprise, Sir Fan Jr. was secretly the commissioner of the Overwatch Council. This matter has always been strange. Did Director Chen already know? Before he finished speaking, the middle-aged man had already hurriedly shoved a wine cup to the side of his mouth, blocking his next words. After a moment of shock, the scholar also felt a lingering fear. The people of the Qing kingdom were simple and straightforward. The common people and scholars were not afraid of the officials, nor were they afraid of Sir Fan Jr. Otherwise, they would not dare to gossip about him in the restaurant. Only the old man in the wheelchair was feared by everyone like a ghost. They did not dare to talk too much about him. The restaurant finally became truly quiet. Everyone began to drink and eat. After an indeterminable amount of time, they suddenly heard a surprised voice coming from the corner. Everyone was startled and turned their heads to look. They found that it was the young man who did not know the glorious history of the Yi family. They saw him stand up with incomparable excitement. He danced with joy and said, "I remember the Yi family. I remember. The Yi family that was the second in command." Everyone laughed and paid him no more attention. For most of the common people of the Qing kingdom, the Yi family had already become a name in a pile of old papers. No one would purposely preserve its existence in their memories. Even the people in the restaurant of Yishir Tavern, if this had happened 2 days ago, perhaps would not have remembered the many changes that the Yi family had brought to the Qing kingdom. But after the rumor that Commissioner Fan was a descendant of the Yi family entered the capital, everyone talked about it too much. Only then did it gradually awaken their dormant memories. Only then did they begin to remember the Qing kingdom after the Yi family appeared. It seemed that the Qing kingdom before the Yi family appeared was far too different. Perhaps it was just a young lady of a manor beginning to miss the smell of perfume. Perhaps it was just a guard at the city gate remembering the wonders of soap as he bathed. Perhaps it was just a soldier staring at the crossbow in his hand in a daze. Perhaps it was a merchant in Shangjing in the north carefully cleaning a glass horse with a silk cloth. Perhaps it was a poet gulping down strong alcohol and feeling endless joy in his heart. Perhaps it was the old man from the Overwatch Council lifting the black cloth to look at everything in the world. Perhaps it was just a young man remembering the first firecracker he set off as a child. In any case, because of the rumors regarding Fan Xian's past, people began to think of the Yi family for one reason or another. Fan Xian walked out the door and welcomed the rare warmth of the winter sun. He stretched lazily and a refreshing smile rose to his face. Because of this matter, it was not convenient for him to return to Tsang Mountain. Following his father's wishes, everyone in Fan Manor pretended that nothing had happened. They watched everything indifferently and welcomed the whispers of the people around them. Deng Ziyu walked over and handed him today's council reports, as well as the private reports from the Qinian unit. Fan Xian read through them in the sunlight and asked, regarding that rumor, "Are there any movements from the officials in the capital?" Deng Ziyu peeked at the calm face of the commissioner out of the corner of his eye and felt great admiration for him. Such a big thing had happened, yet he was still able to keep his composure. Was he not afraid that the palace would immediately send people to arrest him? He did not know of Fan Xian's anxious appearance on Tsang Mountain, so he couldn't help but think even more highly of him. When they first heard this rumor, Deng Ziyu and all the officials in the Overwatch Council and the common people were equally shocked and incredulous. But after thinking about it for a while, they realized that although there was no evidence for this rumor, when compared to Fan Xian's actions after entering the capital, it was very believable. If he was not a descendant of the Yi family, why would the director love the commissioner so much? If he was not a descendant of the Yi family, why would Minister Fan make such a plan to have his own son take over the palace treasury? There's been no big movement. Deng Ziyu was blinded by the sunlight in the garden and woke up from his daze. After apologizing, he said, "The news from the various manors is very clear. The Imperial Censorate has already secretly contacted them, but last time they suffered a big loss, so this time they seem to be more cautious. Instead, in the other departments, some officials have begun to stir. But rumors are rumors, after all. Without concrete evidence, they don't dare write anything to say. Everything is still in the dark." Fan Xian asked, "Is it the Eastern Palace?" Deng Ziyu shook his head. "The officials who are on good terms with the Eastern Palace are still observing. But, yesterday, a few officials' wives entered the palace to see the Empress. After they returned, the officials also met in private. As for what they said, no one knows." "The Empress?" Fan Xian furrowed his brows and sighed. He didn't even have time to find trouble with the Empress. Were they going to come to him of their own accord? The Empress would naturally fly into a rage, but what would the Empress Dowager think? It was only now that he realized that the power he could use, other than Uncle Wu Zhu and that final trump card, was not very secure. In this situation, even if he relied on the emperor's trust in him and Chen Pingping and his father's plan to safely get through this, what about in the future? The situation had to be controlled in his own hands. Only then could he be at ease. In Hanguang Palace, the empress sat by the empress dowager's bed with a face full of tears. She held the old woman's hand in her hand and said pitifully, "Aunt, you have to make a decision for me." The empress dowager sighed and said, "How can I make this decision?" The empress gritted her teeth and said, "Usually, I have always looked at Fan Xian with fear and trepidation. Now, I finally know that he is that witch's son. The emperor is so cruel to hide it from me for so long. That witch has a descendant." The empress dowager stroked the empress's messy hair and comfortingly said, "It has already happened so long ago. What is there to be worried about? You've also seen that brat. It's impossible for His Majesty to give him any title. You keep fighting, but what can you fight for?" Hanguang Palace was completely silent. Other than old eunuch Hong standing guard at the door as if he was asleep, all of the eunuchs and serving girls were far away from the palace. Worry about it? The empress was about to cry. The wrinkles at the corners of her eyes appeared. "Aunt, have you forgotten my father? He is your brother." Although the emperor has always refused to say, how can we not guess the reason? Isn't it because of the matter of killing that witch back then? He has always held a grudge. Hearing the empress say this, the empress dowager's face immediately darkened. She struggled to sit up from the bed and said in a stern voice, "Shut up. In this palace, you should call me Mother Empress, not Aunt. You still have the face to talk about what happened back then? I don't know what kind of jealousy you ate to actually incite your own father to do such a thing, to kill off the entire family. The emperor only told me a few months ago that if Fan Jian's family had not been quick to act and sacrifice dozens of lives, not only would you have killed that woman, you would have also killed Fan Xian." The empress dowager moved her face closer to the empress and coldly said, "Don't forget, although Fan Xian is that woman's son, in his bones flows the emperor's blood. No matter where he is still the flesh and blood of the royal family. If you want to kill him, you have to ask me what I mean." The empress shivered in her heart and endless fear surged out. She looked dumbly at the empress dowager's righteous and awe-inspiring face and thought, wasn't it the empress dowager's tacit consent for us to kill our way into Taiping courtyard? Why are you not willing to admit it now? Seeming to guess what the empress was thinking, the empress dowager's expression relaxed slightly. She lightly said, "There are some things that must not be said. Take it with you into the earth." The empress dowager's eyes filled with anger. She looked at the empress dowager without a sound and rudely said, So even the proper empress dowager is afraid of her own son." The empress dowager's cold gaze stared at the empress's face and said, word by word, "It is not fear, it is love. I cannot bear to see the emperor as grief-stricken as he was in the past, and I do not want another night of Jingdo's blood to flow. The royal bloodline has always been thin, and most of the nobility have already been lost. They cannot endure such torment again." The empress sat in a daze for a moment. Suddenly, she giggled crazily. "Cannot endure torment? My pitiful father, your pitiful brother, died for nothing? Fan Xian is the son of the Yi witch, and the court is not giving an explanation? Are they just going to let the court and the people discuss it? What is the Yi family? The Yi family's crime is treason. Are you not worried that the royal family's face will be completely lost?" The empress dowager slowly said, "You are tired. Go rest. As for Fan Xian, who said he was Lady Ye's son? I don't believe it at all. As for the ignorant people of the world, if they want to say it, they can say it." The empress finally gave up. Her hands gripped her handkerchief tightly inside the sleeves of her dress. Forcing herself to stand, she bowed to the Empress Dowager and turned to walk out of Hongguang Palace. Just as she was about to reach the palace door, the Empress Dowager's cold voice rang out. "I heard that recently, the wives of officials have often come to visit your palace. It is almost the new year, and there are more matters in the palace. You are the mother of the country who controls the 6 palaces. Don't always worry about matters outside the palace, that is all. Go." The Empress turned around and bowed again. With a cold smile at the corners of her lips, she bid farewell and left. Go watch her. Her temper has become more and more strange these years. The Empress Dowager sat on the bed. Her trembling hands barely managed to gather the silver strands in her hair. She ordered old eunuch Hong in front of her, "Don't let these things bother the emperor." Old eunuch Hong made a sound of assent and left Hongguang Palace like a ghost. The palace door creaked. The eunuchs and serving girls who had received the order quickly entered to serve the Empress Dowager. The little hand of the serving girl holding the comb slowly and carefully moved through the silver hair. The Empress Dowager suddenly huffed coldly and slammed her palm on the table. The serving girl combing hair was startled by this sound. Her hand shook and pulled out a few strands of silver hair. She looked at the hair on the comb and was frightened out of her wits. Without thinking, she knelt down and repeatedly kowtowed, not daring to say anything. "Rise," the Empress Dowager said with her eyes half closed. "I am not an old creature who cannot tolerate people." She forcefully suppressed the anger in her heart, but she could not calm it for a long time. The emperor had asked her to suppress the empress because after the night of bloodshed in Jingdo, most of the people related had died. Only the empress knew the true relationship between the Yi family girl and the emperor. Only the empress knew Fan Xian's true identity. If the empress was allowed to do as she pleased, no one knew what those princes would do after they woke up from their fright. Thinking of the Yi family, the Empress Dowager's temples began to throb. A bitter pain began to spread. The Empress Dowager had always thought that the Yi family girl was a curse that would linger around the Qing royal family for countless years. Unexpectedly, this thought had been imprinted on her. She had left a child for the emperor. The Empress Dowager had enough power to deal with this matter. Otherwise, the Yi family would not have been destroyed back then. The old woman's impression of what happened back then was bad enough. After she learned the truth from the emperor's mouth, she remembered that Fan Xian's mother's surname was Yi. Her head began to burn with pain. Thus, when Fan Xian entered the palace a number of times, she avoided him. She could not guarantee that she could show the benevolence that an Empress Dowager should have. When it came to how to deal with Fan Xian, there was a world of difference between her and the Empress's thinking. For the Empress, Fan Xian was, first and foremost, a Yi family girl and the son of her mortal enemy. In the Empress Dowager's eyes, no matter how wrong that Yi family girl was, how many crimes she committed, and how evil she was in the court, the son she gave birth to was, after all, the blood of the royal family. He was her own grandson. Late at night, after confirming that old eunuch Hong had already returned to the small room outside Hongguang Palace, the pale-faced empress gently bit her lip and gave a meaningful glance to her serving girl. In a moment, the crown prince of the Eastern Palace, who had recently appeared steady and had not made any mistakes, arrived in front of her and bowed in greeting. He didn't know what the empress was saying. He only heard her lowered voice become more and more urgent, but the crown prince shook his head the entire time. Mother and son faced each other in silence. A moment later, the crown prince quietly comforted, "Mother, even if Fan Xian is a descendant of the Yi family, so what? He is nothing more than a merchant." "Merchant?" The empress smiled coldly. "Do you think that woman is a normal merchant? She is a demon." The empress stared at the crown prince and said in a cold voice, "Fan Xian is your father's son. If you want to know what happened next, please log on to www.cmfu.com, there are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 325. Late at night, the palace was dangerously peaceful. Hearing the Empress's words, the Crown Prince almost fell to the ground. His face was full of shock. He stuttered, "Mother, what nonsense are you talking about?" The Empress's expression kept changing. After a long silence, she said quietly, "Fan Xian is the bastard child of your father and the Yi family's witch." The Crown Prince shook his head, unable to accept this sudden situation. He shook his head for so long that he felt dizzy. Only then did he sit back down on the bed and mumble, "How is this possible? How is this possible?" Thinking that he had a younger brother who had been wandering among the people since he was young, the Crown Prince felt that life was truly wonderful. Furthermore, this younger brother was often seen in the capital. His reputation was even greater than his own, and the power in his hands seemed to be no less than his own. He unconsciously jumped up. Perhaps to comfort himself, or perhaps to relieve his stress, he laughed foolishly. "So I have a younger brother like this." The Empress looked at her son as if she were looking at an idiot. The Crown Prince's face heated up. Embarrassed, he lowered his voice and roared, "So what? My relationship with him has always been good. Furthermore, his background is not proper, and he can never enter the palace. He is no threat to me." "No threat to you, Your Highness?" The Empress laughed coldly. "Don't forget, his mother's death is inextricably linked to your poor mother. Do you think he will just watch you sit on the throne? Even if he is magnanimous enough not to seek revenge, is he not afraid that you will deal with him after you take the throne? Fan Xian, even if it is to protect himself, he will not let you take the throne." The Empress' voice was like a curse in the palace. "So, you must be prepared. Of course, you cannot spread such critical information. The most important thing is that you cannot let your brothers in the palace know of Fan Xian's past. Otherwise, if eldest brother and second brother." The Crown Prince understood what his mother meant. His voice became a bit erratic. "No wonder the rumors outside say that Fan Xian is a descendant of the Yi family, but father has never come up with a way to punish him. So, there is more to it than meets the eye. But mother, if father continues to favor him as he has in the past, and he has the support of the Fan family and Director Chen, it will not be easy for me to touch him." The Empress Phoenix's eyes were cold. "Of course, we can't touch him now. Our power is too weak. No one in the palace is willing to help us. So, you can pretend to be courteous. But don't believe that your wild brother will have any good intentions towards you. Endure. From today onwards, you will obediently endure. Don't do anything unnecessary. After the spring examination, you were right. No power is as important as your father's love. As long as the Emperor still trusts you, Fan Xian won't dare to do anything. As long as we endure until the future, there will be a way." The Crown Prince was speechless, but he didn't agree with his mother's thoughts. The sky brightened. In the porridge shop, the people gossiping about the Fan Manor and the Yi family continued. The first bureau of the Overwatch Council, which monitored the movements of the officials, was on guard. Everyone in the Fan Manor pretended to be calm amidst their fear. The Emperor had a headache, and so did the Empress Dowager. Minister Fan arrived early at the Ministry of Revenue Yamen. His expression was the same as yesterday, and he talked cheerfully and wittily. There was nothing strange. Chen Pingping did not return to Chen Garden. He stayed in the Overwatch Council and watched everything that happened in Jingdo with his slightly muddy eyes. The sound of sweeping came from the street. Fan Xian had followed Sir Fei's prescription and was taking his medicine on time. In his hands, he held the nameless marshal's secret in a daze. He had long finished practicing the first volume, but he still hadn't found a way to practice the second volume. Particularly now that his Jinqi had completely dissipated and his meridians were riddled with holes, he didn't dare to follow the description of the second volume to forcefully move his Jinqi. As for the matter of his past, Fan Xian's state of mind had already calmed down. The sky was going to rain. His mother was not married and had a child out of wedlock. Let her be. In any case, this matter was not his responsibility. If the palace's fear of his mother was so strong that they wouldn't even allow him, the transmigrator Fu Kengan, to stay, then why should he care? At the worst, it would just be a battle. If, when the emperor's orders came, he could not command the Overwatch Council and Chinian unit, and he had no more Jinqi, and things had reached the most dangerous stage, then don't blame him for listening to his teacher's wishes and going against his mother's wishes. He began to spray poison on mosquitoes and use poison to open up a bloody path. He used a large knife to chop ants and a heavy sniper rifle to take down a few grandmasters. Yi Luyun was not in the capital, and it was difficult for the army to exert its strength against a small number of people. He couldn't imagine who could keep such a strange combination. At this moment, Fan Xian's heart actually calmed down. He gradually began to feel a little bit of the atmosphere of that little girl called Yi Qingmei, who had brought the blind uncle and that box, against the entire world. He was a little nervous and a little excited. Of course, it would be best if it didn't develop to this stage. After all, he still had to consider the interests of the Fan Manor, the safety of his father, sister, and wife, as well as the life and death of many people who were on good terms with him. When the map was drawn, the dagger was revealed. It was only the last move. To be able to maintain the current stability was Fan Xian's most urgent need. There were still many things he hadn't done, and those things had to rely on his current power and position. For the next 2 days, no one came to visit the Fan Manor. Even the people who were closest to the Fan family wouldn't choose to come at such a time when the wind and waves were at its peak. What was strange was that King Jing didn't come either. According to the secret report from the Chinian unit, the gardener prince, for some unknown reason, threw away his hoe and bucket of manure. He only leaned against the railing in his manor and drank. Old tears streamed down his face as if he was feeling something. The officials who were on good terms with Fan Xian, including Xian Chiwu, Ren Xiaofan, and the other junior ministers, were all watching carefully. They were waiting to see how the court would react to this rumor. No one dared to make any statements at this time. In the palace, Lady Ning was wearing a well-fitting dress. Under the warm winter sun, she was walking in circles around the withered tree. This was a habit she had developed for many years. This female prisoner of Dongyi in the past was now a noble in the palace. She was never idle. After walking around for a long time, the great prince, who was standing quietly to the side, finally couldn't take it anymore. He sighed and said, "Mother, what exactly is the matter?" The princes had their own manners outside the palace. Furthermore, the great prince had become the first prince among the princes because of his achievements on the Western expedition. Naturally, he could no longer live in the palace. There were many rules in the royal family. Even if he wanted to enter the palace to visit his mother, the rules in between were a bit complicated. Lady Ning had used some tricks and jumped over many obstacles to directly summon her own son into the palace. However, she had been walking around the tree in a daze the entire time. The great prince knew that his mother must have something important to tell him. Otherwise, she wouldn't have broken the rules in such an eye-catching manner. However, he wondered if it had something to do with the most recent rumor. "Have you heard about Fan Xian's past?" Lady Ning finally stopped. She pulled out a plain handkerchief from her wrist and carelessly wiped the sweat from her forehead. Her expression was solemn. The great prince thought to himself that it was indeed this matter. He respectfully handed a cup of warm tea to her hand and nodded his head in response. "I know about this matter. However, it happened suddenly and there is no proof." Looking at the intentions of father, Empress Dowager, and grandmother, they would definitely not believe these lowly people's rumors. I also don't believe it. Lady Ning looked at her son and smiled coldly. You don't believe it? I think everyone in the world is starting to believe it. She suddenly slapped the stone table angrily and said in a hateful voice, I don't know what's going on with the director this time to suppress this rumor. Does he not know that this will instead make others believe it? What is Fan Xian supposed to do? Fan Xian? She suddenly became distracted. A moment later, she sighed clearly. So, she has a son. So it is Fan Xian. Of course, the great prince knew who his mother was talking about. It was the mistress of the Yi family, who had once shone brightly in the Qin kingdom and ended tragically. He guessed his mother's meaning and probingly said, What do you mean? Lady Ning's eyebrows furrowed. Without anger, she gave off an imposing aura. She sternly said, We Dongyi people pay particular attention to distinguishing between gratitude and grudges. Fan Xian's past has been exposed. Regardless of whether or not the emperor remembers the Yi family's contributions, the person in the Eastern Palace will certainly not tolerate him. Listen carefully. In front of outsiders, the great prince was a valiant and skilled general and a strong and brave man. In front of Lady Ning, he was like an obedient kitten. Unconsciously, he brought his feet together and stood like a little soldier in front of his mother. In a low voice, he said, Mother, please instruct me. If things don't go well. A glimmer of valiance appeared between Lady Ning's brows. No matter what method you use, no matter what, you must protect Fan Xian's life. The great prince didn't even think before agreeing. He had never disobeyed his mother's wishes. However, he still had some doubts in his heart. He knew that his mother had played some kind of role in the blood-soaked night in Jingdo. He just didn't understand why his mother would protect Fan Xian so much. She even ordered him to use the soldiers under his command if he was in danger. This was no different from rebellion. If Director Chen hadn't saved my life, it would have been impossible for me to follow the emperor back from the mountains and rivers in the north, Lady Ning said coldly. Lady Ning spoke coldly of the events of the past. You know about this matter, but even if I returned to the capital alive, what welcomed me was still only an order from the palace. I was a Dongyi prisoner of war. At the time, no one knew that I was pregnant with you. If it hadn't been for Lady Ye's words, you and I would have long become two wandering souls. Lady Ning took a deep breath and said, Fan Xian's mother saved both our lives. Back then, when something happened to her, you were still young. I had no power at all. Now, it is different. Since you have some power in your hands, you must protect Fan Xian's life. The courtyard was silent. The winter sun shone down sparsely and faintly, shining on this sincere, pure, and unconventional royal mother and son. If father cannot tolerate Fan Xian, the great prince said quietly. Although I control the imperial army, I'm afraid I won't be of much use. That's fine. If worst comes to worst, I'll return his life. It's not that scary. You're about to get married. How could I bear to let you take such a risk? Lady Ning stared into his eyes and said, You don't have to consider the emperor's attitude. Just keep an eye on the Eastern Palace. The great prince's heart seemed to move. He immediately thought of a problem. Although he was a straightforward person, he was not stupid. A moment later, he said in shock, if it was only a descendant of the Yi family, father would certainly not be willing to keep Fan Xian. Looking at the movements these few days, there is only one possibility. Lady Ning gave a not quite there smile and said, You finally guessed it? I also think so. For the emperor to not pursue the so-called rebellion and for even the Empress Dowager to remain silent, there is only one explanation. Fan Xian is not only the son of Lady Yi, he is also his own son. In other words, Fan Xian is a prince that no one knows is your brother." The great prince's expression became somewhat ugly. His fists were tightly clenched. He found it difficult to accept this reality. A moment later, he said hesitantly, "Is Fan Xian really father's son? What about Minister Fan? If all of this is true, why did father send Fan Xian to Danzhou back then?" Lady Ning smiled coldly and said, "Back then? Who can be completely clear about what happened back then? Don't forget that Fan Xian's mother was hated to the bone by the two most powerful women in the palace." The great prince blinked. He didn't dare to believe he had heard these words from his mother's mouth. He thought about it for a long time and said, "If even mother could guess Fan Xian's true identity, I think it would have long spread outside the palace. If he guessed it, then he guessed it." Lady Ning brushed the dust off her body and said heroically, "Perhaps this is what the director wanted to see. Perhaps all of this happened because he was sharing the emperor's worries and difficulties. After all, the emperor probably doesn't know what to do with his son. How would the emperor punish Fan Xian?" This was the question that the Jingdou officials and people were most concerned about these days. If the rumors were true, Fan Xian's only way out was to be imprisoned. If the rumors were false, the palace should have used some method, such as rewards or verbal encouragement, to eliminate the effects. The more the rumors spread, the stranger they became. The reaction of the Overwatch Council and the silence of the Fan Manor all seemed to confirm this rumor. Fan Xian was the orphan of the mistress of the Yi family. The problem was, the palace still hadn't sent anyone to capture him. This matter had become quite interesting. The emperor maintained his silence, and the palace maintained its silence. People were confused and began to speculate endlessly. The court officials had originally maintained a clever calm. Even the imperial censorate had only carefully submitted a few memorials to the emperor, describing the rumors in the capital. But the emperor had not published them, and the officials could do nothing. This kind of speculation finally reached its peak after a bold but low-intelligence official jumped out and stirred up a storm in the court. This official's name was Mao Yueliang. He was the Minister of Rights, responsible for reviewing memorials and correcting those who spoke improperly. This muddle-headed official's nature was rough and straightforward, and he yearned for the perfect rule of the saints. He couldn't bear to see anything that would damage the reputation of the court. After the rumors about Fan Xian's past began to circulate in Jingdou, Mao Yueliang foolishly ignored his colleague's silence and went straight to the court to ask the emperor to issue an edict to reprimand these false rumors and restore Commissioner Fan's clean reputation. In the court, the emperor only said lightly, "The innocent are innocent, and the corrupted are corrupted. It is a good thing for the people. Why should you all get mixed up in it and lose your dignity?" Who would have thought that Mao Yueliang would not let it go? He insisted that the rumors were damaging to Fan Xian's reputation. If the rumors were false, they should be refuted by the court. If the rumors were true, then according to the laws of the Qin kingdom, Fan Xian should be prosecuted for the crimes of concealing the truth from the court, entering the court without permission, and colluding with traitors. Even if these rumors were absurd and untrustworthy, at least for the sake of the court's reputation, the emperor should let the two Fan brothers defend themselves. Furthermore, Sir Fan Jr. was no longer suitable to continue holding the position of Commissioner of the Overwatch Council. As for the palace treasury, before these muddle-headed words were finished, the emperor had already left his seat in a rage. He ordered the guards to drag Mao Yueliang out and beat him 20 times. If it were not for the Empress Dowager's plea, this extremely stupid Minister of Rights would have been beaten to death by the emperor. No one knew of the Xinjiang background behind this Minister of Rights, and no one knew that the emperor's final anger came from the Empress Dowager's appearance to protect him. For the emperor, what he was most afraid of was his mother, sister, and sons allying together. In this situation, the ruler of a generation coldly and even forcefully reacted, forcibly preserving Fan Xian's official position and title. This was a kind of stance, the stance of a lion protecting its territory. But the officials and people of the Qing kingdom did not know of the problems in the palace. Once the matter of the beating came out, Jingdo was shocked. Thinking of the last time the imperial censorate had impeached Fan Xian, they had also been cruelly beaten. People once again noticed that the supreme imperial favor Fan Xian had received these years could not even compare to that of the princes. Thinking of the emperor's vague attitude toward this matter, people began to guess. The human imagination was sometimes very poor, but sometimes it was incomparably rich. The rumors about Fan Xian's past began to uncontrollably and gradually slide in a direction that some people did not like to see. As for whether or not the shadowy figure of the old man in the wheelchair was behind these guesses, no one knew. In any case, not long after the first explosive news spread throughout Jingdo, a second explosive news began to spread through the streets and alleys of Jingdo. However, when the common people and officials talked about this news, they seemed even more mysterious, careful, and incomparably excited. May I ask if you know? Sir Fan Jr. is the illegitimate child of the Qing Kingdom's emperor. Of course, he's completely carved from the same mold. You've seen the emperor's dragon countenance? This. I guessed. But honestly speaking, Sir Fan Jr. is a rare talent. He is skilled in both the pen and the sword. His talent in poetry astounds the world. His reputation is known far and wide. Such a person, truly only our wise and divine emperor could have given birth to him. Of course. But Minister Fan, this. Minister Fan is pitiful. It's also Master Fan's fault for not choosing a good name. In the Li Palace in Xinyang, the eldest princess gently drew her willowy eyebrows. There was a glimmer of a self-mocking smile at the corners of her lips. This wondrous woman, who had always considered herself to be flawless, finally knew she had made a fatal mistake after these 2 consecutive rumors. Her brother the emperor must have begun to doubt her thoughts. As for that little thing called Fan Xian, Sir Yuan, I did not listen to your opinion. It was wrong. The eldest princess gently pressed her lips together and said lightly. The strangeness of Sir Fan Jr.'s life is truly unexpected. The first rumor was enough to shock the world. No one thought there would be a second wave. Now, like Huang Yi, Yuan Hongdao had become the chief strategist in Xinyang. He slowly said, at the beginning, I advised the princess to temporarily endure because I felt that the news of Fan Xian being a descendant of the Yi family was a bit strange. But I did not expect that this news would be followed by this shocking speculation. Things happened too suddenly, and the situation changed too quickly. We were momentarily at a loss. This is not the fault of war, but the will of heaven. Now that the eldest princess had lost the Cui family, her interests had suffered irreversible damage. She had truly begun to discover the abilities of her good son-in-law. In her anger, it was difficult for her to maintain her previous arrogant calmness. But her follow-up reaction was a bit too late, and even useless. So when the first rumor entered her ears, she did not think twice, and even disregarded Yuan Hongdao's strong opposition. She decided to use this matter to pull Fan Xian off his horse. But communication between Xinyang and the capital was inconvenient. She wanted to use the Empress Dowager's mouth and the seemingly stupid imperial censor of the 6 departments to force the emperor to remove Fan Xian from his position. She did not expect to immediately receive the second news. Fan Xian was the emperor's illegitimate child? Perhaps other people would have needed to guess, but the eldest princess believed it immediately after hearing it. She began to secretly laugh at her own stupidity. How could she not even understand such a simple matter? She had wasted a pawn in court, used a sliver of her mother's affection for her, and most failed of all, touched the emperor's reverse scale. For no reason at all, she had allowed Fan Xian to easily regain his footing. Thinking of this, the self-mockery and regret in her heart were like a poisonous snake gnawing at the heart of the most beautiful woman in the Qing kingdom. Yi Qing Mei. Her head began to hurt. She muttered to herself as if she was moaning, in this life, will I never be able to match up to you? Even your son can defeat me so easily. Night fell in the capital. Wu Zhu, who had not appeared for a long time, silently appeared in a small alley behind Fan Manor. He was covered with a black cloth. At the end of the alley was a noodle shop. The oil lamp on the noodle shop was as big as a bean, and it shivered in the cold wind. A man wearing ordinary clothes was sitting on a long bench outside the shop. The man on the bench did not have a bowl in front of him. His clothes were thin, and he did not seem to be afraid of the cold. His face was strangely calm, as if he was born without any expression. And his pair of cold and emotionless eyes seemed to be able to see through everything in the world. Tomorrow's chapter is a bit difficult to write. I need to think about it carefully. P.S. Yesterday, I calculated the monthly votes for a long time and found that Qing Yu's year was ranked 10th in the old book. Thinking of the possibility of getting an extra 1,000 yuan, I am very happy. I am earnestly asking for votes. Please vote for me, but this is all I can do at this speed. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please log on to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 326. Wu Zhu lowered his head slightly, allowing the cold night wind to blow at the black cloth over his eyes. His steady and terrifying right hand slowly gripped the handle of the metal drill at his waist. Step by step, he walked toward the noodle shop. The clothes on the man in the noodle shop were made of coarse cloth. It was earthen yellow, half-sleeved, and not thick. It was the clothing of the laborers on the south side of the capital. There was nothing unusual about it. He blinked. The coldness in his eyes did not change. The expression on his face did not change. He only followed the sound of Wu Zhu's footsteps and slowly stood up from the bench. The plain-clothed man held a knife in his hand, a straight knife. With a wave of his hand, the edge of the knife whistled through the air and slashed horizontally. The straight knife landed on the neck of the old shop owner, who was bending over to pick noodles. With a "chee" sound, the noodle shop owner's neck sprayed out blood and poured into the pot of noodles without missing a single drop. Immediately after, the noodle shop owner's head made a cracking sound. Like a heavy fruit falling from a tree in autumn, it was separated from the branch and fell into the noodle soup. With a splat, a few streams of hot and bloody soup splashed out. Without warning, without reason, unusually cold-blooded and steady attack, the noodle shop owner's head was separated from his body. The old head floated up and down in the soup. The soup had already been dyed a murky red. Under the light of the oil lamp that could be extinguished at any moment in the winter night, the scene looked unspeakably terrifying and strange. Wu Zhu stood 30 feet in front of the cloth-clothed man. The half of his face that was exposed outside the black cloth did not move. It was as if he did not care at all that the man had just killed an innocent noodle shop owner in front of him. You came from the south. The blind man's voice was always monotonous and lacked any sense of rhythm. The cloth-clothed man slowly put away his straight knife. His cold eyes stared at Wu Zhu. Although his eyes and expression did not reveal any emotion, for some reason, it gave people the feeling that he had entered a state of extreme vigilance. Routine patrol, the cloth-clothed man said in a weak voice. I came to find you. Wu Zhu said, you came to kill Fan Xian. The cloth-clothed man said, you deliberately spread the news. Because I could not find you in the south, I could only use this method to force you to show yourself. Wu Zhu looked at him coldly, as if he was looking at a dead man. You know Fan Xian is her descendant, so of course you would come to the capital to kill him. The linen-clothed man's eyebrows twitched strangely, as if he wanted to express a kind of astonishment and incomprehension. However, it was clear that his expression was a little stiff, so it looked a little comical. His eyebrows were wriggling like two little worms. You knew the reason, so you asked me to come. Why did this plainclothed man come to Jingdo to kill Fan Xian after knowing he was Yi Qingmei's son? From the conversation between Wu Zhu and the plainclothed man, it was clear that the two knew each other. Furthermore, Wu Zhu knew that once the other party found out about Fan Xian's past, he would do anything to enter the capital and kill him, so he waited outside Fan Manor. It seemed that the recent turmoil in the capital was perhaps the result of Wu Zhu pretending to have miscalculated, secretly reminding Ku He so that he could uncover Fan Xian's past from the distant northern Qi without leaving a trace. If the blind uncle had the ability to construct such a perfect plan, then the only reason he did all of this was to attract the plainclothed man to the capital. Who was this man in plain clothes? A few months ago, on the southern coastline of the kingdom of Qing, a nameless man appeared. He searched everywhere for a blind man, and when he did not receive an answer to his question, he would simply kill everyone who had seen him. There was no reason, and he did not ask for the reason. He was the southern serial killer that Fan Xian and Yan Bingyun could not forget. When the Ministry of Justice was at their wits' end, the Overwatch Council finally began to investigate these strange and bizarre murder cases. But every time the aces of the Overwatch Council tracked down this nameless man, he would turn around and mercilessly kill them all. So until now, no one knew what this nameless man looked like. Yan Bingyun had once thought of borrowing soldiers from Fan Xian and using the Tiger Guards to go south because of this man. When he first appeared in this world, it seemed that he was not used to the ways and principles of this world. That was why he needlessly killed so many people. It was not until later that he gradually understood more things. So he tied his messy hair into the most common bun, put his bare feet into the necessary straw sandals, chose a straight knife that was commonly used by the warriors of the kingdom of Qing, and at the same time, changed into the least noticeable coarse cloth clothes. Wu Zhu took a step forward, getting closer to the noodle stall. He lowered his head slightly and said, "I went south to look for you, but I did not find you." The cloth-clothed man said something that was difficult to understand. "I looked for you in the south, but I did not find you." Wu Zhu's feet were bare, while the cloth-clothed man wore straw sandals. Wu Zhu's hair was tightly bound behind his head, and he did not move. The cloth-clothed man's hair was tied into a bun slightly higher. The aura on the two of them was very similar. Although their clothes and appearances were different, it seemed that these were the only two things that could distinguish the two of them. The aura emanating from their bodies made it clear that these two were ruthless killing machines, but they were also like two hunters hiding in the night. They were clearly looking for each other, but they cared about who found the other first. They demanded that they be the first to find the other party and not let the other party find them. Although it seemed like there was no difference, it was like a life and death struggle between a hunter and a wounded tiger. Whoever had the upper hand would be able to continue living in this world. "Someone told you that I was in the south," Wu Zhu said. The cloth-clothed man did not answer his question. He said directly, "You cannot leave any traces." Wu Zhu said, "She has already left too many traces. Go back to the temple, and I will not kill you." The cloth-clothed man seemed to find Wu Zhu's words very difficult to understand, and it greatly conflicted with the principles he had always believed in. A strange expression flashed through his cold and bright eyes, an expression that was rarely seen in the eyes of the common people. "Come back with me." The cloth-clothed man's tone was still as flat as ever. Wu Zhu's voice was a bit more angry than the other person's. "I forgot some things. Wait for me to remember." The conversation between the two of them continued with a very strange rhythm. If one paid close attention, one would find that in this continuous conversation, the two of them did not use a single question. Instead, they used a very certain tone to describe something. Perhaps they were both very confident in their ability to make logical judgments. Perhaps only these two strange people could use such leaps of thought to carry out a conversation that was unusually difficult for ordinary people to understand. The two people's lips suddenly moved, but no sound came out. It was as if they were carrying out a final, silent negotiation. The negotiation broke down. Wu Zhu took another step toward the noodle stall. The distance between the two of them had already changed from 30 feet to 20 feet. The cloth-clothed man's face was expressionless. He did not take a single step back. He only stared at Wu Zhu's hand on the metal drill, as if waiting for that pale hand to blossom. The sound of a lower pitch came from the stove with the noodle pot. The noodle soup with the human head carried a thick, bloody foam over the top of the pot and flowed along the edge of the pot into the stove. When it came into contact with the fiery red pieces of charcoal, there was a popping sound and a pungent smell of smoke rose into the air. Wu Zhu moved. The black cloth over his eyes became a black thread in an instant. The metal drill in his hand did not blossom, but like the sharp tip of a winter bamboo, it pierced straight toward the cloth-clothed man's chest. Strangely, Wu Zhu did not choose to pierce the throat with the drill today. Almost at the same time he moved, the cloth-clothed man with the straight knife also moved. The two of them used the same reaction time and speed to rush forward. No one could detect the slightest difference. The distance of 20 feet disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. Wu Zhu and the cloth-clothed man suddenly collided. The speed of the two of them was so fast that it exceeded the limits of what the human eye could see. It was as if in one moment they were standing 20 feet apart, and in the next, they were standing face to face. Like two streams of light, they suddenly met. With such speed, whether it was Fan Xian before he was injured, or the shadow assassin of the 6th Bureau, or even Haitang, none of them would be able to react in time. They could only wait helplessly for death. Other than the 4 great grandmasters, no one else in the world had ever touched such a realm. However, when the streams of light collided, there was no dazzling fireworks. In the blink of an eye, there was a deathly silence. The tip of a knife protruded from Wu Zhu's right rib, awe-inspiring and terrifying. Something was dripping from the knife onto the ground. A metal drill accurately pierced through the middle of the cloth-clothed man's abdomen. There was not a single deviation. Wu Zhu moved first, and his speed seemed to be slightly faster than his enemy's. So when the two of them collided, his left knee still had room to crouch. It was just a little faster, but it was a fatal little. At this moment, he maintained this half-crouching position. The metal drill in his hand rose slightly, and like raising fire to burn the heavens, it pierced the opponent's abdomen. From the garden behind the alley came the faint sounds of people. The sound was very soft, but it fell into the ears of Wu Zhu and the cloth-clothed man. Like a saw cutting through wood, the two of them separated in silence. The weapons in their hands were slowly pulled out from each other's body. At this moment, a gurgling sound came from the cloth-clothed man's abdomen, as if something had been broken. Even with such a heavy injury, the cloth-clothed man's face remained expressionless, as if he did not feel the slightest pain. He only stared at the wound in his abdomen like a baby, as if wondering why he was a little slower than Wu Zhu. Wu Zhu had defeated his enemy with one move, but he was also heavily injured. However, he was still as expressionless as his opponent. Only the corner of his lips, which was not covered by the black cloth, had a more worldly air of alienation. He knew that his opponent could no longer survive in this world. And the reason he was able to be a little faster than his opponent was because he had used Fan Xian's past to lure his opponent here. So he had made more preparations. He did not wear shoes, nor did he tie up his hair. Do not be tainted by the world of mortals. The words of the temple did have some truth. The night snow began to fall again. A few figures suddenly leaped over the garden wall and landed noiselessly in the alleyway. As soon as they landed, they pulled out the long knives on their backs and formed into a killing formation, looking around cautiously. The newcomers were the tiger guards responsible for Fan Xian's safety. After confirming that it was safe, Gao De sheathed his knife and walked to the noodle stall through the sparse snowflakes. Looking at the pot of noodle soup on top of the broken stove and the sinister and terrifying head in the soup, he furrowed his brows. Immediately after, his gaze fell on the place where the head and body had been cut off. He only glanced at the wound, and a glimmer of coldness and fear involuntarily appeared in his eyes. What a fast knife! Gao De suddenly felt an icy coldness at his neck, as if snowflakes had burrowed into his clothes. He knew that the battle that had happened here earlier was not something someone like him could rashly interfere with. Although he had not seen it with his own eyes, he could guess what kind of miraculous realm the two people fighting had. The snow gradually grew heavier and gradually grew colder. The still warm noodle soup and blood also chilled the hearts of everyone in the alley. The noodle stall paused miserably at the mouth of the alley. The owner was already dead, the stove was already cold, and the blood was already dry. No one in this world had ever seen that in this snowy night alley, there had once been two nameless aces, not ranked among the grandmasters, but with the strength of a grandmaster, who had fought here. The Overwatch Council official on night duty was dozing off. The building in the snowy night appeared even colder and more solemn. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept past and startled him awake. He slapped his face in shock and ordered himself to wake up. There were usually many officials on duty in the courtyard at night. Furthermore, Director Chen had not returned to Chen Garden recently because of Commissioner Fan's matter. Instead, he sat directly in the courtyard and suppressed everything. If the director knew that he had fallen asleep earlier, there would be no good consequences. At this time, Chen Pingping was half leaning on the wheelchair, dozing off. The old man's health had not been very good these past few years. Even though the stove in the room was extremely hot, he still subconsciously used his skinny hands to pull the wool blanket on his knees and cover his chest. The door opened and was closed again. Chen Pingping woke up and slowly blinked his somewhat muddy and powerless eyes. Looking at the black cloth in front of him, he quietly said, "Why are you here?" Only then did he notice the terrifying wound on the left side of Wu Zhu's chest. His snow-white eyebrows immediately rose. Although he was not angry, he was very cautious. He asked, "What happened? Who could injure Wu Zhu?" Then it could only be one of the great grandmasters who had acted. No matter how arrogant Chen Pingping was, in the current troublesome situation in Jingdo, it was difficult for him to accept the news that the enemy had suddenly gained the help of a great grandmaster. Wu Zhu did not answer his question. He only directly said 3 sentences. "Have the shadow return. The person who injured me knows that I am in the south. If Fan Xian dies, the Qing kingdom will fall." Wu Zhu knew that the old cripple in front of him had enough intelligence to understand these 3 sentences. The terrifying injury he had received made it impossible for him to hold out much longer. After he finished speaking, he quickly and quietly left the Overwatch Council. Chen Pingping sat in his wheelchair and sank into a long silence. In the fireplace not far from him, the red firelight danced like a fairy, reflecting red on his pale and haggard face. Although Wu Zhu's 3 sentences were simple, they revealed very important information. The first sentence was to have the shadow return, indicating that his injury was very serious and that he could not stay by Fan Xian's side to protect him. He wanted Chen Pingping to fulfill his promise ahead of time and summon the shadow back to protect Fan Xian's safety. However, the person who had the power to injure Wu Zhu should already be dead. Otherwise, given Wu Zhu's personality, for the sake of Fan Xian's life, no matter how serious his injury was, he would not leave Jingdo. Who could injure Wu Zhu? It could not be one of the great grandmasters, otherwise Wu Zhu would not purposely hide the other person's identity. Chen Pingping's heart trembled slightly. He vaguely guessed something. This conjecture had existed many years ago, but it had never been confirmed. On the night Wu Zhu carried Fan Xian out of Jingdou, the two of them had thought about how to help Fan Xian escape from that unknown danger. But, how did the temple know that Wu Zhu was in the south? Chen Pingping furrowed his brows and began to sort through everything. During the 2 years that Fan Xian had been in the capital, Chen Pingping had asked more than once about Wu Zhu's whereabouts. Fan Xian had always carefully told a lie, saying that Wu Zhu was in the south looking for Yi Luyun to play. Other than Chen Pingping, the only person who knew of this false information was the emperor, whom Chen Pingping had once told. See Volume 2, Chapter 62. Wu Zhu's second sentence was to remind Chen Pingping of this point. Looking at it this way, the threat in the third sentence was something that should be expected. Your Majesty. The wrinkles at the corner of Chen Pingping's eyes twitched slightly. He sighed softly. You really do surprise me. I admire you. In just a moment, he had already figured out the emperor's true thoughts. Although he did not know how the emperor could form a connection with the illusory temple, he was very sure of one thing: the great emperor really did want Wu Zhu to disappear. For an emperor, perhaps it was very difficult for him to accept that there was a great grandmaster by his side. If a great grandmaster went crazy, he would have enough power to shake the rule of the court. This was something that anyone could think of. Even if it was impossible for him to kill his way into the royal palace alone and slaughter the entire royal family, he could travel to the ends of the world with a single sword and kill off all the provincial officials in the roads without having to worry about being surrounded by the army. He could also hide in Jingdou for 10 years. Once he drew his sword, he would scare the emperor so much that he would never leave the palace and his edict could not leave the city. Under such circumstances, no one dared to be an official, the emperor did not dare show his face, and other than falling apart, what else could the court do? That was why he was able to intimidate all the nobles and officials in the north who wanted to rebel. That was why Sigurd Jian could protect Dongyi with a single sword for so many years and allow the power of his sword to spread out and support the small vassal states caught between the two large countries. As long as the seemingly undisciplined but actually intelligent Yi Luyun continued his endless journey to the ends of the world, the Qing kingdom would treat the Yi family generously. Even if an emperor wanted to change the defenses of Jingdou, he would be forced to use such a shameful and sinister move as arson. Of course, Yi Luyun himself knew the taboo of the royal family. After all these years, he had never returned to Jingdou. If war broke out, the emperor could use the Yi family to threaten Yi Luyun. He could use the lives of tens of thousands of northern Qi people to persuade He. He could use the survival of Dongyi to remind Sigurd Jian. The two sides could reach some kind of balanced agreement. Wu Zhu was different from these three great grandmasters. He did not have a large family to burden him. He did not have any country or people that he needed to protect. Everything he did was for Fan Xian alone. Thus, he had more freedom and could not be threatened by the emperor or used by each other. The two sides did not even have room to bargain. If something happened to Fan Xian, once Wu Zhu went crazy, the world would go crazy with him. Thus, as long as Wu Zhu was there, the emperor had to cherish Fan Xian. Just like in the past few years, he had to play the role of a guilty and helpless father, an emperor with great ambition but a belly full of sorrow. Perhaps the emperor admired Fan Xian as a son from the depths of his heart, but in the end, he was still an emperor. He could not allow Fan Xian to have such a loyal and devoted great-grandmaster as a servant. Even if he had not used the people from the temple to come this time, there would come a day when the emperor would find a way to get rid of Wu Zhu. Of course, Chen Pingping knew that this was only one reason. As for the other reason, it was probably the faint fear in the emperor's heart. The temple never interfered in worldly affairs. No one had ever truly seen the people from the temple. The people from the temple did not appear in the world once in hundreds of years. If they could have Wu Zhu die with the people from the temple and forever hide Fan Xian's connection to the Yi family, burying everything in the past in a pile of old papers. For the emperor, this was perhaps the most beautiful ending. However, the emperor had not thought that Fan Xian's past as a descendant of the Yi family would be exposed so quickly. His own son had become the temple's primary target. He wanted to use the temple as a knife to kill Wu Zhu. Instead, Wu Zhu had used Fan Xian's past to successfully lure and kill the visitor from the temple and protect Fan Xian's life. Chen Pingping did not know what Wu Zhu had done, but he only thought with a glimmer of sorrow that the emperor clearly knew that someone from the temple had come to the world. After Fan Xian's past was exposed, he had never warned him or Fan Xian. Could it be that, for anyone other than himself, the emperor would only give faint sorrow and sympathy? The old man smiled coldly and pushed the wheelchair in front of the fireplace. He greedily extended his hand closer. As he warmed himself, he yawned and mumbled in an unclear voice, "You really know how to enjoy yourself. You actually made a fireplace. You are excellent in everything. It is just that you are a bit muddle-headed in this matter. Girl." At dawn, the remote and quiet place in Jingdo called 3 Li Wai was dark. One could faintly make out the shadow of a circular building. It was made entirely of black wood. It was a temple. Snowflakes fell one after another, causing the temple to be covered with a layer of otherworldly aura. This was the Temple of Qing. It was rumored at the only place in the kingdom of Qing that could communicate with the illusory temple of the Temple of Qing, the temple where the royal family worshipped heaven. The temple door opened with a creak. The great priest of the Temple of Qing, who had not appeared in Jingdo for a long time, walked out. Compared to Ku He of the Temple of Qi, this ascetic monk, who was unknown, had a shocked expression on his face. Silently and sorrowfully, he picked up the body from the snow and staggered into the temple. The body was wearing a common cloth garment. The cloth-clothed man did not answer his question. He said directly, "We cannot leave any traces." Wu Zhu said, "She has already left too many traces. Go back to the temple. I won't kill you." When I wrote this, I almost had Wu Zhu say, "Anyone who walks by must leave a trace." Then I immediately came to my senses. I was stunned and speechless. Only now did I realize that I really was a very sour person. This was a very scary thing. Today's chapter was very tiring. The quality was better than the previous chapters. From the next chapter onwards, it will be much easier. The consequences of yesterday's vote solicitation were shocking. Suddenly, it went up. I don't know what to say. I can only sincerely thank everyone. Then I thought of the big mistake I made with Purple Eye in the book review section. I am so sorry. I wish the mother and child safe. I wish Sister Kofi a happy pregnancy. Don't crawl with laughter. I wish everyone an easy life. To be continued. If you want to know what happens next, please go to www.cmfu.com. There are more chapters. Support the author. Support the original reading. Chapter 327. The Fan Manor was now divided into a front and back manor, occupying a large area in the south of the city. Between the two manors was a garden with fake mountains and flowing water. Naturally, the garden was not small. It was winter, and the trees had long hardened. Only a few frozen plum blossoms were still growing. Early that morning, there was a sudden rush of breathing in the Fan Manor garden. Ha, 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 ha. Fan Xian was wearing an unlined robe and was running around the garden wall. He had just recovered from his injury and was in a rush to train his body. Inevitably, it was a little strenuous, and he was panting heavily. The 2 tiger guards on duty and a few swordsmen of the 6th Bureau were vigilantly guarding every corner of the garden, ensuring the safety of the commissioner's morning training. Outside the study, Deng Ziyu and Gao De had strange expressions on their faces. Their gazes followed Fan Xian. They did not understand why Fan Xian ran for so long every morning, and Fan Xian had never explained it. Training twice a day was a good habit he had developed since he was very young. Now that he was injured and could not train his Jinqi, he could only put in more effort in training his body. Hidden hard work was one of Fan Xian's best qualities. However, none of the servants in the backyard looked at the young master who was running. These days, everyone was used to it. They squatted in front of the stone steps of the servants' room, brushing their teeth, and chatting with each other while blowing foam. These were the best things in the palace treasury, and only the back manor of the Fan Manor would be willing to buy them for the servants. Fan Xian was a person with a slight obsession with mental cleanliness. The 10 laps were finally over. Fan Xian stood under the eaves outside the study, panting heavily. His hands were on his hips, and his head was lowered. He looked just like Yaming in the 4th quarter. He waved his hand, signaling for the servant girl who was holding the copper basin to wait a moment. His family's women were still in the Tsang Mountains, so the former residents had sent a maid to serve him. The maid, who had 2 braided braids, curiously looked at the sweaty face of the young master. She felt very strange in her heart. Why did a character like the young master have to make himself suffer like this? She put the copper basin on the bench and covered Fan Xian with a coat. She flicked the water with her little finger to test the temperature of the water. "Young master," she said quietly, "the water is very hot. It will get cold if we wait any longer." Fan Xian nodded and reached into the copper basin to pick up the towel. He didn't care at all about the scalding water and didn't wring it much. He lowered his body and placed the towel on his face, wiping vigorously. Water droplets dripped down from the towel and his cheeks. After washing his face was slightly red from the heat, and he seemed to be in much better spirits. His eyes were clear and full of spirit. He threw the towel back into the basin and looked at the 2 people beside him. After thinking for a moment, he said, "We are going to enter the palace today. Ziyue, go to the first bureau and see if there are any council matters that have been suppressed these few days." Deng Ziyu responded and left. Fan Xian glanced at Gao De again and said, "Wait for me outside for a while. I have something to discuss with you in a bit." After the situation in the capital had settled, Fan Xian knew that the palace did not intend to destroy him physically. He no longer had any reservations and summoned 4 tiger guards to come down from the Tsang Mountains. Gao De was not on duty today, so he was a bit confused when Fan Xian called for him. Hearing Fan Xian say this, he felt a bit more at ease and stayed outside the study. Entering the quiet study, the light in Fan Xian's eyes dimmed a bit. He sat down on a chair and carefully examined the condition of his body. He found that the condition of his body after the explosion of Jinqi last time had not changed much. His meridians were still riddled with holes, and the Jinqi scattered among his internal organs was temporarily well behaved and had not harmed the functions of his internal organs. Under these circumstances, he did not dare to forcibly circulate his Jinqi. But if he waited for his meridians to automatically recover, who knew how long that would take? After returning from the Tsang Mountains, Fan Xian had been very quiet. He did not participate in the discussions and struggles of the outside world. In the eyes of Chen Pingping, Fan Jian, and Fei Jie, the older generation, perhaps the young man had been frightened by the successive shocks. Furthermore, that level of political struggle was indeed not something Fan Xian could control, so they tacitly approved of his silence. But only Fan Xian himself knew that the biggest reason he appeared so relaxed these days and allowed his elders to arrange things for him was because of the condition of his body. Uncle Wu Zhu had once said that there was no one in this world that could truly be trusted. So Fan Xian only trusted himself. In his eyes, no one's favor, no one's care, was as reassuring as his own strength. Even if he had the Tiger Guards, the Overwatch Council, and the Qinian unit at his side, if things really did not go well, the only thing he could rely on was his own martial arts. The problem was, his jinqi had completely dissipated and he had no ability to protect himself. Although the people outside all thought his injuries were gradually healing, he knew that was far from the case. Thus, he had to be silent. He had to shrink into his shell like a turtle. Although his posture was ugly, it was safer. A knock came from outside the study. Fan Xian made a sound of acknowledgement. The person who pushed open the door was the wife of the Teng family. She held a tray in her hand. On it were 2 bowls of medicinal soup and a few small bowls of medicinal pills. It gave off a strong smell of herbs. Fan Xian's medicine was watched and handled daily by the wife of the Teng family. In such an important process, there were not many people he could completely trust. The wife of the Teng family placed the tray on the table and quickly went to pour a few cups of warm tea. Like soldiers lining up, she was terrified that she wouldn't have time to pour water while Fan Xian swallowed the medicine. Fan Xian shook his head. With one hand holding the medicinal bowl and the other grabbing a handful of medicinal pills, he sent them into his mouth without a change in expression. However, the amount of medicine was too much. Even with his bold and vigorous eating method, it still took a while to clear all of the medicine on the tray. "It's been hard on you, young master." The wife of the Teng family wore a pitiful expression and smacked her lips as if she was the one taking the medicine. Other than pity, this woman also greatly admired the young master. Every day, he gulped down so much medicine. What kind of life was this? Yet, the young master's expression did not change and he enjoyed it as if it were malt syrup. Sir Fei of the Overwatch Council was also something. It was just a knife wound. Was there a need to be so nervous and prescribe so much medicine? Fan Xian smiled and said, "I saved money for breakfast." The master and servant chatted for a bit before the wife of the Teng family left the study. Fan Xian sat behind the desk and began to stare blankly. Every day, he ate 1 or 2 caddies of medicine. There was no need to mention his teacher's medical skills. It was indeed very beneficial for strengthening meridians and channels. However, in the end, it was not a complete solution. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but think of Haitang's letter. Was Ku He really willing to pass on the martial method of Tianyi Dao to him? He smiled self-mockingly. It looked like the other party was preparing to raise him like a fierce tiger. The Qin kingdom had done this before, such as the eldest princess and himself. They all hoped that Shang Shanhu in the north could continue to maintain his bravery and fierceness so that the other party's court would always be in a nervous and uneasy state. Ku He would not be careless in such an important matter as the martial method of Tianyi Dao being passed on to outsiders. Furthermore, only Haitang had a good relationship with him among the disciples of Tianyi Dao. Fan Xian was certain that the person who would pass on the martial method to the south would be Haitang. Thinking of this, for some reason, Fan Xian began to look forward to that day. Suddenly, he lowered his gaze and looked at the cups of tea in front of him. He felt that these cups of deep green and yellow tea were very much like one-eyed strange people. After a moment of surprise, he laughed out loud because of his strange ability to make connections. Immediately after, his throat felt dry, his stomach swelled, and the urge to vomit rose up. Knowing that he had taken too much medicine and taken it too quickly, he quickly picked up a cup of tea and downed it. He rubbed his chest with lingering fear and smiled bitterly. He no longer looked as cool and fierce as he did in front of the wife of the Teng family. For some reason, after being tormented like this, his mood strangely improved. He tossed his past, hatred, threats, the royal palace, Jiangnan, and everything else to the back of his mind. Life was like countless medicinal pills. You had to swallow them slowly. Perhaps it would be bitter, perhaps it would choke, but you still had to eat them. It was always good to be a bit happier. Gauda held his knife behind him with one hand. His feet stood at an irregular angle. His aura was imposing, but no one saw that the hand holding the hilt of the long knife behind him was trembling slightly. He looked at Fan Xian, who was beaming with joy not far in front of him. His heart skipped a beat. He wondered to himself why the commissioner was so happy today. It was completely unlike the mildewed state of a few days ago. After Fan Xian left the study, only then did Gao De know that the commissioner had asked him to wake up early to exchange pointers with him. Gao De knew that he was not a match for Fan Xian. Furthermore, Fan Xian had recently been heavily injured, so he would not agree. However, he was forced by Fan Xian. In the end, the two of them decided not to use Xinqi to compete. This was exactly what Fan Xian wanted. He didn't have any Xinqi left, so he couldn't really fight. The tiger guard's long knife matched up against the black dagger the palace guards had picked up from the golden chrysanthemum bushes in front of the hanging temple. The two aces were fighting in the garden of the Fan Manor with real weapons. The clanging was very lively. It attracted many servants to come and watch the show. Some of the bolder ones even shouted at the top of their lungs to cheer for the young master. Unable to use Xinqi, he relied entirely on his body's control and reaction speed. In just a moment, Gao De was at a disadvantage. No technique seemed to be of much use in front of Fan Xian's reaction speed and reaction speed. There was no Xinqi attached to the weapon. Gao De suddenly discovered that Fan Xian's strength was slightly greater than his. Regarding this problem, he could not understand it no matter how he thought about it. He knew how hard he trained in martial arts. How could the commissioner be above him? Particularly now that he was facing Fan Xian, he was not only facing a superior subordinate. Whenever he thought of Fan Xian's rumored past, Gao De would always feel an unconscious fear when he attacked. As a result, one weakened and the other strengthened. After crossing swords a number of times, the hand holding the long knife began to tremble. Fan Xian's finger pulled. The slender black dagger cleverly spun a circle in his hand, drawing a circle of black light. It looked very strange. In reality, this was just a technique he had practiced in class in his previous life before he was admitted to the hospital. However, in Gao De's eyes, this move was truly powerful. He looked at Gao De, furrowed his brows, and shook his head. You can also see that my injury has healed. Don't hold back. After saying this, the tip of his foot pushed off the slightly slippery winter mud. His entire body tilted forward and charged forward quickly. A cold light flashed through Gao De's eyes. Finally, his two hands gripped the hilt of the long knife. His legs crouched slightly and he roared, "Break!" The long knife chopped down squarely and sliced through the morning air in the back courtyard of the Fan Manor. The knife came down quickly, but Fan Xian's attack was even faster. While Gao De's long knife was still raised above his head, he had already charged in front of him. With a spring of his legs and a pull of his wrist, like a bird with food, he held the dagger and stabbed down viciously. With a crisp clang, the two of them separated by 2 steps. They trembled a few times before standing firm. Fan Xian had the upper hand and made it impossible for Gao De's long knife to fully exert force. Gao De had the advantage of the weight of the long knife. The two of them fought to a draw. Fan Xian smiled and waved his hand. Let's leave it at that for today. Starting tomorrow, we'll fight every day. I think this is good for healing. After saying this, he coughed and used his sleeve to cover his mouth. Looking at the threads of blood on his sleeve, he did not panic. Although he had not used much Xinqi in that last attack, the blood had rushed back. Without Xinqi to protect his heart meridians, he had still suffered some injuries. Gao De did not notice this. He only furrowed his brows and said, "Sir, it's best not to use Xinqi after you're injured." However, replacing training with battle and not using Xinqi doesn't seem to be of much use. After all, when facing an enemy, the difference is too great. Even if you train your body to the extreme, it will not bring much benefit to your realm. As the commander of the Tiger Guards, and seeing Fan Xian running, he mistakenly thought that Fan Xian was planning to walk a new path of cultivation, from external martial arts to internal martial arts. As a matter of course, he reported to his subordinate, and cautiously expressed his opposition to this crooked path. Fan Xian smiled. It's just loosening the meridians. Of course, I know what the foundation is. You don't have to worry. There was something he didn't say. In this world, there were indeed people who did not know Xinqi but could still reach the highest realm, such as Uncle Wu Zhu. Gouda had already reported to him about the murder in the alley outside the manor the night before. He thought that Uncle Wu Zhu had killed another Xinyang assassin and did not care much. He only thought that one day he would find a secluded manor and have Uncle Wu Zhu cut a few plates of cold shredded radish. He would drink a few cups of wine and reminisce about the happy times he had in Danzhou. The red sun had risen, and the morning chill had slightly dissipated. The servant girl in the front manor had already come to call for him. Fan Xian went into the room to change and walked toward the front manor. Along the way, he looked at the rising sun and the light winter scenery in the garden. His heart was relaxed and at ease. He had no idea that his closest uncle Wu Zhu had already floated far away to recover from his injuries or what kind of danger he had faced. Fortunately, it was all in the past. The atmosphere at breakfast in Fan Manor was a bit strange. After all, the people in the front manor did not serve Fan Xian every day, so the pretty little servant girls always liked to greedily peek at the young master's beauty. In any case, the young master was used to people looking at him and did not care about it. But today, not many servant girls dared to look at Fan Xian, who had just entered the door. They only stood silently behind the table and served him. Occasionally, one of them dared to glance at him, but the expression in their eyes was one of respect and fear. The imperial power was like the heavens. This idea had long been deeply rooted in the hearts of the common people and scholars. And now, there were rumors that Fan Xian was the illegitimate child of the emperor and the mistress of the Yi family. Thus, everyone looked at Fan Xian differently. The blood of the imperial family ran in his veins. He was no longer just the loving and respectable young master of the past. He was no longer just a powerful official who excelled in both the pen and the sword. He was the son of the emperor. But in this rumor, the role of the master of Fan Manor, Minister of Revenue Fan Jian, was inevitably somewhat awkward. So no matter how curious the servants and servant girls of Fan Manor were, they could not show it at the table, unless they wanted to die. They could only whisper to each other in the middle of the night, under the warm blankets. Fan Xian could sense that something was amiss, but the beautiful smile on his face did not fade. He walked straight to the table and respectfully bowed to his father, who was sitting upright on it, to pay his respects. Fan Jian half closed his eyes to rest, and very naturally nodded his head. Lu Shi, who was sitting next to Fan Jian, had a strange expression on her face. She forced herself to hide it, but the smile on her face was still a bit unnatural. Lu Shi's family background was deep, and of course, she knew the truth of the rumor. These days, she had long been shocked, especially when she thought about how she had wanted to poison the young man in front of her. Thinking of Fan Xian's true identity, she felt that it was very inappropriate for her to accept this vow. She wanted to stand up and avoid it, but she was afraid that the master would be angry. As if sensing her strangeness, Fan Jian's lips curled into a faint mocking smile. He slowly opened his eyes, looked at his son in front of him, and said, "You are entering the palace today. Pay attention to your actions." Fan Xian laughed. "It's not the first time, so there's nothing to pay attention to. Isn't it the same as before? Wasn't it the same as before?" The meaning of this sentence was simple, but also not simple. Lu Shi, who was listening on the side, felt her heart tremble. While she was still pondering this, the father and son were already smiling at each other. They understood each other very well. One was comforted by the old, and the other was full of admiration. How harmonious! As they were eating, they suddenly heard the faint sound of people coming from the east gate of the garden. Fan Xian stopped eating and frowned. Who is making a racket? Fan Xian handed over a towel and let Lu Shi wipe the grains of porridge from his father's beard. He knew that ever since his father left his life in Lujing River, he had walked the path of righteousness. Seeing his father's slightly angry appearance, he couldn't help but laugh. What could possibly happen? Eat your meal in peace. A servant hurried to the door of the manor to say something, and a servant girl came in to say something. Fan Anji was shocked to hear this. He no longer cared about persuading his father to eat in peace. He put down his chopsticks and stared at the door, not knowing what to say. The mistress, Lin Wanner, and the mistress, Fan Ruoruo, had already led Cici and Siki, the two servant girls, and a group of attendants back to the capital in a carriage. They had already arrived at the gate of the manor. Fan Xian looked at his father in surprise. Father, didn't we hide this from the mountain? Wanner and Ruoruo's group had hurried back to the capital in the early morning. Presumably, they had moved yesterday, and had come back overnight. They were in such a hurry that even the Tiger Guards and Overwatch Council officials left on the mountain hadn't had time to send a message to him. This was because the girls had finally learned of the rumors circulating in the capital. They were worried about Fan Xian, so of course they had rushed back. Fan Xian knew that his daughter-in-law and daughter had returned home, and his expression had already returned to normal. He took the towel from Lu Shi and wiped his face, then lowered his head to eat his porridge. He spoke slowly. Yi Linger and Princess Rugia are both on the mountain. How long can this be hidden? Seeing his son's blank expression, Fan Xian smiled. You young people have things to say. Go to the back of the manor. In a bit, the little kitchen will make you some new food. Coming down from the cold mountain, make something hot. Fan Xian knew that his father had given him permission, so he hurriedly complied and went out to receive them. The back of the manor was silent. Fan Xian, Wanner, and Ruoruo sat in the room like three clay bodhisattvas. It seemed that they didn't know who should speak. After all, this matter was a bit complicated. If Fan Xian were to explain, he would probably have to say a long story. If he were to let the girls ask, they didn't know what the rumors were about. Asking random questions would make Fan Xian unhappy. A moment later, it was Wanner who finally bit her lower lip and probingly asked, have the rumors in the capital died down? No. Hearing his wife's question, Fan Xian actually let out a big breath in his heart. He smiled and replied, how can things like rumors die down so quickly, and you too, how big of a deal is this? Is it worth rushing down the mountain and traveling through the night? What if you too fall? How am I supposed to live? He was now teaching his wife and sister a lesson, but he had forgotten that when he first came down the mountain, he was like a frightened stray dog. He had been ridiculed by Fan Xian and Chen Pingping. I'm going into the palace in a bit. Fan Xian thought for a bit and looked at his sister, who wanted to say something but stopped herself, and his wife, whose face was full of helplessness. He smiled slightly and said, if there is anything, we can talk about it when we get back tonight, but I want to say something first. I, Fan Xian, will always be Fan Xian. I can give you this promise. Fan Xian went out and began to prepare for the palace. Cici, with a face full of exhaustion, moved in front of him. Cici had grown up with Fan Xian. Their affection did not need to be said. More importantly, she had been influenced by Fan Xian to become very bold. There were no taboos or too many thoughts of seniority. Lin Wanner and Ruoruo both had some questions that they couldn't ask, but this serving girl was more direct. She mysteriously pulled Fan Xian's sleeve and came to a quiet place in the garden. She opened her mouth and asked, young master, I heard from Lady Yi that your mother is the mistress of the Yi family? Fan Xian laughed loudly and patted Cece's head. Cece is still the most straightforward. Then, he lowered his voice and also mysteriously replied, yes. Cece's mouth opened wide and immediately turned into a silly smile. This serving girl was older than Fan Xian by 2 years, but she still had such a soft and dazed personality. She was still not satisfied with her gossipy heart and continued to ask, then, are you really, the Emperor's son? To be continued. If you want to know what happened next, please go to www.cmfu.com. More chapters. Support the author. Support original reading. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.